Chapter 2:15. The gray-clothed monk was the lowest-ranked monk in the Wanwang Temple. However, the gray-clothed monk actually walked out from the third courtyard of the Immortal Temple. It was truly inconceivable, because only Great Master Yuan Shu walked out from the third courtyard. Now, all 300 nascent soul realm cultivators should be in the second courtyard. There were other monks in the Immortal Temple. Moreover, it was clear that this was not an ordinary monk. The gray-clothed monk did not look old, around 30 years old. However, his figure was thin, and he was slightly tall. He actually looked somewhat weak. However, when the gray-clothed monk appeared, all of the monks in the Immortal Temple bowed respectfully, including Great Master Yuan Shu. However, no one made a sound. The young monk's expression was grave and stern as he slowly walked from the third courtyard to the second courtyard. However, he did not say a word. However, when the monk appeared, there seemed to be a formless power. The Wanwang Temple's front courtyard that was still shaking gradually calmed down. Divine tribulation. Sumo and Guanxiong both raised their brows. They were very familiar with that aura. That young monk was actually a divine tribulation cultivator. At this moment, Linghu Hahuan's expression changed slightly, because the appearance of this monk was definitely not part of her plan. There was a divine tribulation in the Immortal Temple. Back then, there was definitely no one who walked out from the 9 underworlds, because Linghu Hahuan could not sense the 9 underworlds brand on his body. Who was this monk? It seemed like his status in the Immortal Temple was even higher than that of the white-robed Yuan Shu. The aura of the divine tribulation instantly suppressed everything. At that moment, the entire Immortal Temple was completely silent. Divine tribulation was a godlike existence on the White Bone Continent, because the Undying Realm would never appear on the White Bone Continent. He is at the intermediate stage of the divine tribulation. Guanxiong transmitted his voice to Sumo. Intermediate stage of the divine tribulation. That was an existence one realm higher than Guanxiong and Feng Shi. The Immortal Temple actually had such a peerless expert. Who are you? Linghu Hahuan asked. The young monk did not say a word. However, his eyes slightly narrowed. His eyes contained a divine light. Then, he raised a palm and bowed slightly as a form of greeting. However, he did not conceal his divine tribulation aura at all. Actually, he wasn't deliberately releasing his oppressive might. Instead, it was natural. The young monk said nothing. Linghu Hahuan frowned and asked again, "Monk, who are you?" The young monk's expression didn't change, and he didn't say anything. At this moment, the surrounding Immortal Temple monks unexpectedly didn't say anything. They didn't have the slightest intention of starting a conversation. For a moment, the atmosphere in the entire Immortal Temple was rather strange. "Monk, who exactly are you?" Linghu Hahuan asked 3 times in a row. However, the young monk did not say a word. He didn't say anything, but the young monk's aura seemed to be getting stronger. The entire Immortal Temple seemed to be under his pressure. One man suppressing 10,000. That monk had that kind of power. The cultivators of the Southern Domain felt their bodies go numb and their legs go weak. They wanted to retreat, but they couldn't move at all. At that moment, Linghu Hahuan also felt that oppressive might. That young monk gave her an indescribable feeling. He was as steady as a mountain, unsurmountable. "Monk, are you a mute?" Linghu Hahuan mocked. Because, in theory, a divine tribulation cultivator couldn't be a mute. A mute? As soon as Linghu Hahuan said that, Sumo's heart skipped a beat. A mute? That was because 3 of the 5 holy wheels had left the 5 wheels back then. Among them, the most powerful one was the 4th disciple, Mute Sure, who had already reached the peak of the soul transformation realm. The 4th disciple of the Holy Wheel was proficient in all kinds of techniques, and his cultivation was extremely high. However, he never spoke a word his entire life, so everyone called him Mute Sure. During the great battle between the 5 wheels and White Bones, 4 of the 5 disciples of the Holy Wheel showed up. Only the 4th disciple, Mute Sure, did not show up. Mute? Mute Sure, mid-stage divine tribulation cultivator. Sumo and Guanxiong couldn't help but look at each other. They were both thinking, Could it be that this young monk in front of them was the founder of the Five Wheels? You sure? Linghu He Huan said that the young monk was mute. When the monk heard that, a faint smile actually appeared on his grave and stern face. Then, the monk lightly pointed at the void with one hand. The tip of his finger emitted a brilliance. Following that, 16 words appeared in the air. Life and death are up to fate. Please leave quickly. The nine nether is like a dream. There's no need to come again. Although the 16 words were simple and unadorned, each of them shone brightly and condensed without dispersing, as if there were really 16 words forcibly engraved in the void. Linghu He Huan frowned. She carefully looked at the 16 words. However, what she saw was not the literal meaning, but the brilliance flowing on the words. The light of the divine tribulation was endlessly resplendent. Linghu He Huan understood that that was the young monk's warning to her. The power of the divine tribulation was definitely not something that an ordinary person at the peak of the soul transformation realm could contend against. Although Linghu He Huan was not an ordinary person at the peak of the soul transformation realm, it was almost impossible for her to resist the divine tribulation. However, Linghu He Huan was absolutely unwilling. The nine nether is like a dream? Huh. Linghu He Huan turned his head to look at Grandmaster Yuan Shu and the others. Those who betray the nine underworlds will forever be pinned on the pillar of shame. One day, the sea of stars will reappear, and your names will be removed from the heavenly book. You will wander the worlds like wild ghosts with no place to rest. Are you really willing? Linghu He Huan's words seemed to indicate that he couldn't restrain his power and could only use his emotions. However, Grandmaster Yuan Shu merely shook his head. The nine nether is like a dream. I have no regrets. At this moment, Grandmaster Yuan Shu's clothes were no longer fluttering. The moment the young monk appeared, Grandmaster Yuan Shu had been standing in his original spot. Linghu He Huan narrowed his eyes as the corners of his mouth curled up into a charming sneer. Li Yuan Shu, what a good nine nether like a dream. No regrets? You're so stubborn. Linghu He Huan laughed coldly. Today, I'll show everyone what's underneath your Wan Huang temple. The nine underworlds is not a devil, and I can't let you raise a devil. As Linghu He Huan finished saying those words, intense killing intent appeared on his face. Looking at her back, he saw two silver wings protruding from her back. With a flap of those wings, they were more than 10 feet long. It turned out that she'd been hiding a pair of wings under her loose white robe. The wings shone with silver light, dazzling everyone's eyes. The nine nether silver wings. Grandmaster Yuan Shu's expression changed. There were only 3 pairs of such wings in the entire nine nether city. Linghu He Huan actually brought a pair with her. No wonder she was able to leave the nine nether. When the silver wings spread, Linghu He Huan looked like an angel. She did not charge toward the young monk. Instead, she used the power of her wings to break free from the restraints of the god's tribulation and charged toward the front yard of the Wan Huang temple. At that moment, Linghu He Huan was like a white fairy that charged toward the demon world. Chapter 216. The nine underworld silver wings were the ultimate treasures of the Pure Lands. Moreover, Linghu He Huan was at the peak of the soul transformation realm. Linghu He Huan spread his wings and flew straight into the night. At that moment, the monks of the old temple could not help but suck in a cold breath. That night was just too terrifying. Master Yuan Shu raised his white eyebrows. He did not expect Linghu He Huan to rush straight into the night. That was a gamble. The corners of Master Yuan Shu's clothes fluttered again. He knew what was going to happen. The young gray-robed monk didn't seem to have expected this either. Linghu He Huan used his treasure to break free from his shackles. Whoosh! The silver wings shone, but they were drowned by the night. Moo! The rainbow divine bull roared at the sky. The female cultivators of the Bliss Palace also rushed to the front yard of the Wan Huang temple. However, they did not enter the temple. Instead, they all stood outside the walls of the temple. They looked in from outside. Everything was dark. There was no light. At that moment, everyone surrounded the perimeter of the Wan Huang temple. At that moment, all the cultivators gathered their courage. They were naturally curious about what was in the front yard of the Wanwang Temple. Sumo and Guanxiong wanted to see what it was. The young gray-clothed monk looked at the front yard of the Thousand Desolation Temple, after which he shook his head and sighed softly. There was a deep helplessness in his gaze. He had appeared to prevent this situation from happening. However, things did not go as he wished. Life and death were up to fate. In reality, he really did not want to get involved in any fights, because, in his eyes, all the battles were meaningless. His heart had died a long time ago. At least it was half dead. That day, he did not show up, even after witnessing the Battle of the Five Wheels and Bones. Today, he wanted to protect the reputation of the Wanwang Temple. He did not want the Wanwang Temple to collapse. However, it seemed impossible now. The monk in gray felt a tinge of bitterness in his heart. He did not want to know right from wrong. However, why would the things he wanted to protect always be destroyed? It was like that in my past life, and it is the same in this life. Tonight, the Wanwang Temple that has stood for nearly 100,000 years in the southern region will be saved. He did not care about Buddha or demons. What he cared about was why fate always went against him. No one knew what the gray-robed monk was thinking. Suddenly, an endless amount of mournful cries came from the void in the front yard of the Wanwang Temple. That kind of mournful voice pierced through the night sky, making one's hair stand on end. All of the southern domain cultivators present, including Sumo and Guanxiong, had heard the same miserable screams before. Because on the night when the blissful female cultivator was killed, such a voice could be heard from the night sky. It was like the howl of an evil spirit from the netherworld. The expressions of all the female cultivators of the Bliss Palace changed at that moment. The black and white emissaries frowned. The azure-robed female cultivator held the five-colored divine bull's nose ring. She was afraid that the five-colored divine bull would rush into the darkness. Moo! Even so, the five-colored divine bull still raised its head to the sky and neighed. Ghost! At this moment, the blissful female cultivator, who was lucky enough to survive, heard the mournful cry and started howling. At the same time, he was waving his arms and legs, completely deranged. Suddenly, she turned around and stretched out her hand, forming a claw. Puff! The little monk guarding her had his attention focused on the void of the Wanwang Temple. He did not care about her at all. Although the little monk looked young, he was still at the early stage of the nascent soul realm. If he were to be placed anywhere else on the White Bone Land, he would be at the level of an ancestor. However, the female cultivator of the Bliss Palace was like a ghost. The little monk was caught off guard, and his chest was pierced through by the claw. The blissful female cultivator, who was dressed in loose monk robes, suddenly threw her head back and laughed. However, the laughter was no longer her own. It was as if she was possessed by something. Her long hair was flying, and her face was pale. She had lost all her features. Her nose was sunken, her eyes were sunken, and her cheeks were sunken. That was not the blissful female cultivator's original face. She looked like a female ghost. At this moment, the ghost's hand was dripping with blood. She was holding the little monk's immortal heart. That turn of events was out of everyone's expectations. Reverend One Monk was right next to the little monk. However, it was too late. Everything happened in an instant. When Reverend One Monk turned around, the ghost-like existence was heading straight for him. Perfected nascent soul realm. Reverend One Monk's realm was, of course, not something the little monk could compare to. However, the moment the ghost reached for him, Reverend One Monk's body suddenly froze. At that moment, he felt as if he had been completely imprisoned. The ghost's fingers seemed to have some sort of inexplicable power. Reverend One Monk did not understand what was happening at all. Puffed! The ghost's slender, pale, and bloodied fingers pierced through Reverend One Monk's immortal heart. Whoosh! At that moment, there was an uproar outside the Wanwang Temple. After all, Reverend One Monk was the presiding officer. Looking again, there were two balls of white light floating in the void, one big and one small. They were the relics of Reverend One Monk and the little monk. At that moment, White Brow's Yuanshu did not move at all. He seemed to have been frozen in place by something. The other monks were momentarily at a loss. Whoosh! The ghost wanted to move again. However, the young monk in gray reached out with his left hand and gently extended his index finger. A ray of light froze the ghost in the void. Then, the monk in gray lightly shook his head. His gaze landed on Yuanshu, and then he looked at the two relic fragments. That gaze was very special. Boom! Boom! At that moment, there was already a strange change in the Wanhuang temple. Crack! The pitch-black Wanhuang temple suddenly lit up, as if a white lightning bolt had split the darkness. Kikik! Kikik! Demonic laughter rose and fell. Black and white flashed in the void of the Wanhuang temple. It was struggling between black and white. The moment the white light shone, everyone saw a strange scene. Linghu Yihuan stood in the void with his wings spread. However, his silver wings were covered in black blood. The blood was not human blood. At the same time, countless black shadows surged around Linghu Yihuan. The black shadows were of different shapes and sizes, like wandering souls. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws, surrounding Linghu Yihuan. It was a scene that could only be seen when there was white light. However, when it was black light, everything was hidden in the darkness. There was nothing. When there was white light again, the black shadows around Linghu Yihuan lessened. However, everyone could see that Linghu Yihuan's face was slightly pale. Moo, moo, moo. At that moment, the five-color divine bull looked up to the sky and moaned thrice. Ding-dang, ding-dang. Among the countless screams, the clear sound of a bell could be heard. Soul guiding technique. Soul guiding bell. The white light shone again. Linghu Yihuan stood in the void of the Wanhuang temple. Her silver wings were almost completely stained by black blood. However, she formed a seal with one hand and held the bell with the other. Rumble, the entire Wanhuang temple shook. This time, the monk in gray did not stop her. Rumble, rumble, the white light became longer. The ground in the center of the Wanhuang temple began to split and bulge. The front yard of the Wanhuang temple was split in half. A giant black shadow slowly rose from the ground. Chapter 217. Inside the 10,000 Desolation Temple, the earth rumbled. A black pagoda slowly emerged from the ground, shaking the 10,000 Desolation Mountain. Black fog swirled around the black tower, surging with countless dead souls. Jijiji, kakaka, tens of thousands of demonic cries and ghostly wails came from within the black tower. The black tower floated up layer by layer, and the entire 10,000 Desolation Temple continued to shake as if there was an earthquake. There were still many tenants in the 1,000 Desolation Temple. At this moment, they could no longer care about the 10,000 Desolation prohibition of not going out at night. Hundreds of cultivators and mortals ran out of the guest rooms, because staying indoors would only mean waiting for death. At that moment, it was as if the heavens and earth were collapsing. Ka-ka, boom! Fortunately, lightning flashed and thunder roared. The entire front yard of the 1,000 Desolation Temple was as bright as day. It was no longer covered in darkness. As for the black wandering souls, they were all swimming around the black tower and had no time to care about the person who had run out. Bang! The cultivators worked together to open the door of the Temple of 10,000 Desolation and rushed out like a tide. At that moment, it was time to escape. The cultivators who had escaped stood outside the 10,000 Desolation Temple in a daze. At this moment, the so-called front yard of the Wanhuang Temple only existed in name. The walls of the temple had collapsed, and the temple had fallen into enemy hands. It was almost in ruins. The black tower was still slowly rising. Linghu Yihuan's face was slightly pale. Her 9 nether silver wings were covered in black blood. At this moment, the wandering souls no longer attacked her. However, she stared intently at the black tower, a mocking smile on her lips. 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors, 8 floors, 9 floors, 10 floors, 16 floors, 17 floors, 18 floors. A total of 18 levels. The 100-jong tall pagoda was completely black as it stood within the 10,000 desolation temple. At that moment, almost everyone's eyes were filled with terror. This was because the tower was emitting an extremely terrifying aura. That tower came from hell? In other words, it was hell. The pagoda was covered with strange patterns and runes. All light seemed to be absorbed by it and turned into darkness. Every floor of the tower had a circle of skulls, but there were no doors or windows. The Bitter Soul Tower. Ling Huihuan sneered. At the same time, sadness flashed across her eyes, because that pagoda was a treasure of the ninth hell. But now it had become like this. The people of the 9 underworlds were not devils, nor could they raise devils. However, those who climbed out of the 9 underworlds had already completely deviated from everything about the 9 underworlds. She understood that it was impossible to bring back the person she wanted to bring back. On the heavenly book, everyone from the immortal temple would have their names removed, because they had already sold their souls. Guanxiong, what tower is that? Sumo asked. I don't know. Guanxiong could only answer truthfully. Perhaps it's something from the 9 nether. At that moment, the young monk's eyes were filled with sorrow. With the appearance of the Bitter Soul Pagoda, there was no turning back. Gigi Kakaka? From the top of the Bitter Soul Pagoda came the demonic sounds and ghost cries again. At this time, the black souls were completely attached to the Bitter Soul Pagoda. However, once they touched the Bitter Soul Pagoda, they would be burned. Chi. Endless black smoke rose, but the wandering souls continued to rush forward like moths to a flame. Dang! 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 Suddenly, the sound of a wooden fish came from the black tower. At that moment, all was silent. The clear and melodious sound of the wooden fish was extremely clear and rhythmic in the night. Clang! Clang! Then the magical bell rang. Woo woo! Then the magical conch. Sanskrit sounds echoed. Namo, Amadabaya, Doda, Ja Duo Yi, Duo Di Ami, O Du Papai. It was like a ritual. All of this had happened that night with the female cultivator of the Bliss Palace. Now it was just a repeat. The cultivators of the Southern Territory frowned with nervous expressions, because everything was too strange. Ling Huihuan floated in the air with a grave expression. Looking again, the black tower gradually emitted a black brilliance. Figures appeared on every level of the pagoda. Some of them were sitting cross-legged, some were sleeping on their sides, and some were raising flames to the sky. They all had different postures. The only thing they had in common was that they were all black shadows. Outside the Bitter Soul Pagoda, there seemed to be tens of thousands of Buddhas. However, there were exactly 300 monks to deal with the 300 nascent soul cultivators of the Immortal Temple. At that moment, all the cultivators were shocked. Could there be a dark night Immortal Temple above the white bones? The lowest level of the Bitter Soul Pagoda suddenly lit up. A dim yellow light came from the bottom of the pagoda. The Bitter Soul Pagoda had no windows, but at that moment, the dim yellow light seemed to be coming from the inside out. It was the figure of a monk. He was sitting cross-legged on the lowest level of the Bitter Soul Pagoda. He seemed to be slightly hunched, and the shadow of his long eyebrows was clearly visible. Grandmaster Yuanshu? That was what everyone was thinking at that moment, because it was the shadow of Grandmaster Yuanshu sitting cross-legged inside the pagoda. Hee. Ling Huihuan sneered. The 18th level of hell? Li Yuan. When these words came out, everyone in the backyard of the Immortal Temple was startled. Amit Ba, a hoarse and stiff Buddhist chant came from the Bitter Soul Pagoda. After 100,000 years, the 9 underworlds still found this place. The owner of the voice seemed to have not spoken for tens of thousands of years. Why? We have already left the 9 underworlds and cut off everything. The voice was intermittent, and it sounded rather difficult. At that moment, the expressions of all the monks in the Immortal Temple changed, because that voice was really the voice of Master Yuani. Had Master Yuani really been in the 1,000 Desolation Temple for 100,000 years? What had he done in these 100,000 years? Cut off. Ling Huihuan sneered. Do you think you can cut it off just because you say so? Li Yuani, if you had been peaceful, the 9 underworlds might not have come to find you. However, you have deceived the world and used the power of all living beings to raise a demon. What are your intentions? Nonsense. My heart is towards Buddha. Where is the demon? Li Yuani's voice became smoother. He. Ling Hu Huan shook his head. Those who deceive others must first deceive themselves. You brothers have already reached the stage of being stubborn and stubborn. You can no longer differentiate between demon and Buddha. Above the white bones, all living beings have no souls. So where does Buddha come from? All of this is a dream, an illusion. You have done this knowingly. Could it be that you want to awaken the white bones and bring chaos to the Pure Land? Awaken the white bones and bring chaos to the Pure Land? Many of the cultivators present did not understand these 8 words. However, Guan Xiong and Sumo's hearts trembled, because they had seen the terror of the white bones awakening. If the entire white bone continent awakened, it would definitely be a calamity for the Pure Land. However, Sumo and Guan Xiong did not understand. The white bone's head and upper body were basically sealed by the power of the God's tribulation. Guan Xiong absolutely believed in his 7 chess pieces. The white bones of the southern region only had a pair of white bones. How could they cause a huge wave? Ha ha, kikik. Suddenly, Li Yuani's laughter came from within the bitter soul pagoda. However, the laughter gradually became demonic. The 9 underworld city is so boring. So what if I want to awaken the white bones? Whoosh! Tens of thousands of black winds swept above the bitter soul pagoda. Chapter 218. The black wind howled, as if it was the end of the world. At that moment, the entire southern region of white bones trembled. The earth quaked on the 1,000 Desolation Mountain. Rocks tumbled down, trees were uprooted. At that moment, the old shaman of the White Lotus town that Sumo and Guan Xiong had been stood outside the town. He didn't sleep at all that night, because there was an inexplicable restlessness in his heart. He hadn't felt this way in many years. Today was the last day of the Divine Sun Assembly. He didn't know if the 2 guests had prayed for the White Lotus town, but he felt restless on this day. After midnight, he wandered outside the town. Lord Shaman, what are you doing? Sometimes, White Lotus town residents would ask him. He smiled warmly and said he was waiting for someone. Actually, the old shaman didn't have anyone to wait for. He was just waiting for a feeling. As expected, that ominous feeling came. There seemed to be an inexplicable ripple coming from the land of white bones. The entire earth was shaking. Of course, the shaking wasn't that big, but the old shaman still had a trace of spirit energy in his body, so he was more sensitive than other mortals. It was finally here. The old shaman shook his head and sighed, then slowly walked into the town. He wanted to walk to the small square of the town because the lantern was there. Those who lit up the lanterns had their own mission. The old shaman's back didn't look lonely, but rather satisfied. This was because the true meaning of their existence was for this day. Like the legendary love monk, he reincarnated and never forgot his love. 1,000 Desolation Mountain, 1,000 Desolation Temple. Inside the bitter soul pagoda, the demonic shadows swayed. So what if I want to awaken the bones? This sentence made Sumo and Guan Xiong frown. The young monk in gray also sighed and shook his head. Whoosh! And as soon as he said that, the shadows of the monks on the bitter soul pagoda started to change. Countless wandering souls, 300 shadows of the dark monks, they were merging. Their merging speed was extremely fast. Almost in an instant, the shadows and the black wind all disappeared. They turned into a mysterious dark power, directly pouring into the top of the Bitter Soul Pagoda. Bang, bang, bang. The Bitter Soul Tower had a total of 18 floors. Following the infusion of the fused mana, every layer lit up as if a Buddhist lamp had been turned on. Within the Black Tower, there was white light. Black and white intersected, looking rather strange. When the lights on the 17th floor lit up, there was another change. Jia. On the 18th floor, Li Yuani's shadow suddenly stood up. Then, starting from the 18th floor, he rushed all the way to the top of the tower. Who? Looking at the top of the Bitter Soul Pagoda, he saw a figure dressed in a black monk's robe. That shadow looked exactly like Grandmaster Yuanshu. However, he didn't look like a real person, but more like a demonic shadow. An extremely unique aura was emitting from the body of the demonic shadow. Divine tribulation? Guanxiong sucked in a breath of cold air. That was because the demon shadow, which had fused all of its powers, actually carried the aura of a divine tribulation. The tree longs for tranquility, but the wind never ceases. Li Yuani actually put his palms together. I'm wholeheartedly devoted to Buddha and do not care about the past. Why does the Nine Nether want to annihilate us? The Nine Underworlds is no longer my territory. For close to 100,000 years, I have sealed myself under the Wanhuang Temple and lived every night without worry. Although I occasionally went crazy, it was because they didn't follow the rules. I do not leave the temple and do not harm others. Why do you have to lure my soul out? Li Yuani's voice had completely returned to normal. His words actually seemed to make sense. However, Ling Hu He Huan shook his head. Li Yuani, back then, you and your brother were more ambitious than the sky. You would rather risk the possibility of your soul being destroyed to crawl out of the Nine Underworlds. The Nine Underworlds are bitter and dark, never to see the light of day. Since you are of the sinless faction, it is understandable that you chose to leave the Nine Underworld city. However, you cannot harm the Pure Land. Today, I will not lure you out. Once you nurture a demon soul, you'll be able to control the white bones. When that time comes, how many millions of lives will be lost? Who on the Bone Continent will be able to control you? Hee. In the name of Buddha, you do evil deeds. The Wanhuang Temple is the greatest scam on the Bone Continent. Ba. When Ling Hu He Huan said this, the expressions of the monks of the Immortal Temple who were still alive changed. This was because in the past 100,000 years, they had been cultivating Buddhism day and night to save all living beings. The Wanhuang Temple had saved countless people in the southern region of the Bone Continent. How could they say that the Wanhuang Temple was the greatest scam on the Bone Continent? Monk 1 and Reverend Yi Jing were both dead. However, there were still 34 one-word yellow-robed monks. At this moment, they were chanting Buddhist names in unison. Life and death were insignificant because they had lived for 100,000 years. However, they could not allow Ling Hu He Huan to slander them. Reverend Yuanshu? At this moment, Reverend Yuanshu was still there. They naturally had to turn around and ask. At this moment, they needed Reverend Yuanshu to speak. However, when they turned around to look at Reverend Yuanshu, they could not help but be dumbfounded. This was because Yuanshu was still standing there without moving. However, his eyes had turned completely black. His eyes were like black holes. There were traces of black energy wrapped around his snow-white monk robe. Demonization, that was what everyone was feeling. Ba. Reverend Yuanshu finally spoke. Everyone, there is no Buddha in the world. Similarly, there is no demon in the world. The Nine Nether believe that it is not a demon, but why is it so dark? The Nine Nether claims to be guilty, but I would like to ask, what kind of sin cannot be redeemed in 1,000,000 years? Why make so many undead people seal themselves under the Nine Nether? Between Buddha and demon, we are brothers, and we only ask our hearts. For 100,000 years, we have all been together through pain and joy. Now, all fate has been severed. For 100,000 years, everyone has worked hard. Reverend Yuanshu bowed deeply to the 300 monks. If there is reincarnation, we shall meet again. After saying this, Reverend Yuanshu's white robe fluttered, but traces of black energy curled around it. He formed a seal with his hands, and a dazzling white light shone from between his brows. It seemed to be a Buddhist bone relic. Chi chi chi, sounds rang out in the air. Looking at the 300 monks of the Wanhuang Temple, their expressions all changed. There seemed to be a seal planted in their bodies, causing them to lose the ability to resist. What relic fragment? Everything was alive from Li Yuani and Li Yuanshu. It was just a Tao technique of theirs. The 300 monks were their puppets, and the 300 monks were their tools to transform the power of living beings. Whoosh! A ray of white light appeared above the heads of the 300 monks. Then their entire bodies seemed to have been sucked dry, and they withered instantly. The 300 monks actually turned into dried corpses, and all the white light gathered in the Buddhist bone relic between Reverend Yuanchu's brows, forming a vortex. Yuanchu's technique changed. Hua! The white light entered, just like when Sumo was bestowed. Divine tribulation. Li Yuanchu's lips curled up. The corners of his clothes no longer fluttered lightly, but fluttered without any wind. Chapter 219. The young monk in gray had a calm look in his eyes. He did not stop everything from happening just now. In reality, he could have. Originally, the gray-robed monk wanted to control everything in the southern region of White Bones to be within his control. Thus, he wanted Linghu Hehuan to leave. However, that was no longer possible. The fight between the various powers could not achieve the so-called balance that he hoped for. I seem to be living in a dream. The monk in gray mocked himself in his heart. At this moment, there was a deity tribulation inside and outside the Wanwang Temple. Li Yuanyi and Li Yuanchu, the twin brothers from 9 hells. One black and one white, one dark and one bright. They indeed wanted to control the White Bones, and they were very close to success. Perhaps in another 3,000 years, or even 1,000 years, everything would be different. However, Linghu Hehuan's arrival had broken everything. However, there was still a chance for the current situation. The two brothers had joined forces. 2 deity tribulations should be able to kill all the cultivators. After all, they were both in the middle stage of the deity tribulation. At this level, the White Bones were invincible. Amit Ba, Li Yuanyi and Li Yuanchu chanted. However, when they chanted the name of Buddha, it sent chills down everyone's spine, causing them to shudder. At this moment, many cultivators on the Bone Continent felt that the entire world of White Bones had changed. The Wanwang Temple was the sacred ground of the Bone Continent, the #1 sacred ground. However, it seemed like the sky had collapsed today. Everything about the Wanwang Temple was a lie. The Wanwang Temple was just an empty shell that raised demons. Everyone, no one can leave today. I'm sorry. Li Yuanchu's white robe fluttered, and he still had the posture of an eminent monk. His appearance was disgusting. No one could leave. Many of the White Bone cultivators were terrified. In front of the deity tribulation, they were really ants. Death, for most people, was filled with fear. Master Mute, I hope that you can stay out of this. Firstly, we have been friends for tens of thousands of years, and secondly, we have worshipped you for tens of thousands of years. If you leave now, we will mind our own business. How about that? Li Yuanchu's attitude was very humble. However, behind that humility was a demonic heart. Master Mute, middle stage deity tribulation. At that moment, Guan Xiong and Sumo looked at each other. They were absolutely certain. The young monk in gray was the 4th disciple of the 5 Holy Wheel Apostles, Mute Sure. At this moment, they were greatly reassured. The mute monk smiled at Li Yuanchu and shook his head. No one on the White Bones knew about the mute man's background, just like the 5 wheels did not know about Fengshi's background. The Wanwang Temple had worshipped the mute for tens of thousands of years. The mute man smiled bitterly in his heart. On the White Bone Continent, if there were no mutes, how could there be Buddhism? How could there be desolation? Everything about mute was actually in the legends of the White Bone Continent. Everything about 5 wheels was only an important part of his life, but it wasn't everything. The mute warrior shook his head. Actually, this was also within Li Yuanchu's expectations. However, he did not panic, because he believed that he had enough power. The existence of the mute warrior had always been a double-edged sword to Li Yuanchu. If Linghu Hehuan hadn't been so decisive earlier, Linghu Hehuan would have been killed. Perhaps the mute would be able to force her to leave. However, everything did not develop according to Li Yuanchu's plan. If that's the case, I can only regret it. Li Yuanchu sighed. As he spoke, he looked in Li Yuanyi's direction. Yuanyi, we have tried our best. Let's begin. Leave no one alive. Li Yuanchu's tone was filled with helplessness and regret, but the message he conveyed was resolute. Buddha and devil were vividly portrayed by him. Leave no one alive. Guan Xiong and Sumo both had cold smiles on their faces. A cold light flashed in Sumo's eyes. That was because an indescribable emotion rippled in Sumo's heart. He hated everything that was fake. Sumo came to solve his doubts, but the Desolation Temple presented him with this in the end. It made Sumo feel like he had been cheated. In Sumo's mind, this was the feeling he disliked the most. The experience of the 5 wheels had always made Sumo feel uncomfortable. In other words, that feeling was Sumo's sore spot. Everything that wasn't real, Sumo wanted to destroy it. Leave no one alive? Hee hee. Sumo sneered. This time, he did not transmit his voice. Instead, he said naturally, Guan Xiong, do you remember when I said I wanted to kill a god? I remember. Guan Xiong smiled. Sumo, your chance is here. At that moment, everyone was paying attention to Li Yuanchu and Li Yuanyi. When Li Yuanchu said, leave no one alive, there was a moment of dead silence. And Guan Xiong and Sumo's conversation abruptly appeared in that deathly stillness. At that moment, the cultivator closest to Sumo and Guan Xiong was Mei Wanyin from the Sky River Gate. He looked at Guan Xiong and Sumo as if they were crazy. A young cultivator and a fat servant. Were they crazy? That was because Mei Wanyin knew them. During the day, Sumo had argued with the black-clothed female cultivator from the Bliss Palace. Killing a god? Was that something that would happen on the Bone Mainland? Li Yuanyi and Li Yuanchu heard Guan Xiong and Sumo's conversation. However, their techniques had already been activated in that instant. He did not have time to make any judgments. Moreover, he had yet to discover Guan Xiong and Sumo's true realm. Boom! Li Yuanyi formed a seal with both hands. The Bitter Soul Pagoda rose from the ground and rose into the sky. The pagoda's black light scattered in all directions, layer by layer, like waves in the sea. Wherever the black light passed, the pressure of the god's tribulation was as heavy as Mount Tai. There was also an indescribable aura within it. It was the remnant power of the 9 hells. At that moment, Linghu Yihuan spread her silver wings. The god's tribulation artifact withstood the pressure of the god's tribulation. However, Linghu Yihuan's face was extremely pale. Even though she had the 9 hells artifact to protect her, she had expended too much energy. After all, she was not a god's tribulation. At the same time, Master Mute took out a string of prayer beads. The string of prayer beads only had 7 beads. However, it hovered in the sky and protected all the cultivators of the Bone Southern region. That was true mercy. Master Mute's expression was calm. The Bitter Soul Pagoda was only Li Yuanyi and Li Yuanchu's first move. Then, Spectre Li Yuanchu made the first move. His figure moved and charged towards Linghu Yihuan like Spectre. A God Tribulation intermediate stage cultivator should be able to deal with Linghu Yihuan easily. Li Yuanyi's realm had greatly exceeded Linghu Yihuan's expectations, because she really did not expect them to be able to absorb the power of 300 monks. They all came from the 9 hells, but those 300 monks were devoured by them in the end. It should be said that the Li brothers had lost their last bit of humanity. Whoosh! Linghu Yihuan could only retreat. Fortunately, she still had the silver wings to protect her body, otherwise she would be finished. At that moment, Guan Xiong laughed. Sumo, you kill that white-robed guy. I'll save the damsel in distress. Don't be afraid. Don't we still have Ancestor Mute? As he spoke, Guan Xiong had already flown up. Chapter 220. Amipa. The Mute Master placed one of his palms in front of his chest, silently reciting the name of Buddha. In fact, he already knew that Guan Xiong and Sumo were here. Back then, although the Battle of the 5 Wheels took place hundreds of thousands of miles away, the Mute Master saw everything clearly. At this moment, Guan Xiong and Sumo flew out one after another. Guan Xiong's words especially caused him to shake his head and smile bitterly. However, Guan Xiong was right. There was indeed him, the Mute Warrior Patriarch, to hold the line. If the sky collapsed, he would naturally be there to hold it up. Therefore, there was no need to be afraid. The The sudden appearance of two experts startled Li Yuanyi and Li Yuanchu. The reason for that was because the divine tribulation energy radiating from Guanxiong's body was extraordinary. Divine tribulation. Although Guanxiong was only at the early stage of the deity tribulation, it was still a deity tribulation. Moreover, Guanxiong was a genuine deity's tribulation realm cultivator. Chi. Guanxiong pointed with one hand, and 3 rays of cold light shot out from his fingertips. After all, it was Li Yuanyi. The cold light was bone-chilling, and as soon as it appeared, the surrounding air seemed to freeze. Divine tribulation spell. Li Yuanchu was also taken aback. Spirit tribulation cultivators on the White Bone continent were as rare as phoenix feathers and Chilan horns. So how did he manage to hide from his spiritual sense? Early stage divine tribulation? Which bloodline was he from? The cold light was like a blade, streaking across the void, and even icicles appeared. However, the specter Li Yuanchu flicked his long sleeves, and a black light filled the sky. Black flames soared, and in an instant, it was like a sea of fire. Chi. Hoo. The cold light disappeared without a trace. Guanxiong did not attack again. Instead, he stood in front of Linghu Huan. He stuck out his stomach, looking very stern. At that moment, Guanxiong felt like a hero saving a damsel in distress. Who are you? Li Yuanyi's voice was cold. I am the descendant of the immortal void realm. Guanxiong's small eyes shone with a cold light. Guanxiong was confident because his background was extremely powerful. Descendant of the immortal void realm, Li Yuanyi was clearly stunned. He had not expected the successor of Immortal Void, one of the 3 holy lands of White Bone, to come. When the immortal void realm appears, it must be a god tribulation. However, the so-called inheritors of the immortal void realm had not walked the White Bone continent for a long time. Why would he suddenly appear here? This is the matter of my Wanwang temple. I hope that you, immortal emptiness, will not interfere. Hee. Guanxiong laughed. I don't care about the matters of the 1,000 Desolation Temple. It was up to you to live or die. It would be fine even if there were 8 or 10 of such temples. But if you want to awaken white bones, that won't do. Your grandfather, had just suppressed it not long ago. So how can I allow you to mess around? What's more, Guanxiong, can't tolerate others bullying women. Today, I will enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and uphold justice. Palace Lord Linghu, rest for a while. I'll be here. The latter half of Guanxiong's speech was mostly nonsense. Although he couldn't get close to women, he didn't mind leaving a good impression on them. Moreover, she was a beauty from the Netherworld city, and there were opportunities outside of the Bone Continent. I beg for Huan. Make love? Hee. Just thinking about it made Guanxiong excited. Therefore, Guanxiong was very proactive. Linghu Huan was pleasantly surprised to see such a strong reinforcement. Thank you, successor of the immortal void realm. Linghu Huan's tone was sincere. However, it naturally contained a different kind of charm. Don't forget, she's the Palace Lord of Bliss. Her words of thanks made Guanxiong's blood boil. I'll go all out for beauty. Whoosh! Guanxiong immediately made his move, fiercely rushing towards Li Yuanchu. He might not win, but he could definitely put up a fight. Li Yuanyi definitely couldn't do anything to him for the time being. Meanwhile, the battle on Sumo's side was even more intense. Great perfection of the soul transformation realm. In truth, ever since Sumo reached the great perfection of the soul transformation realm, he had almost never encountered a strong opponent. This was because there were very few people on the Bone Continent who could match up to Sumo. In the past 100 years, he often fought with Guanxiong. However, it wasn't a life-and-death battle, but a kind of sparring. Therefore, Sumo had always been looking for someone who could fight against him. In the past 100 years, Sumo's state could be said to be in a repressed state. Today, Sumo finally found a strong outlet to vent. The Godslayer tribulation was the best way to vent. A great perfection of the soul transformation realm could fight a mid-stage deity tribulation realm cultivator. In a sense, it was like trying to break a rock with an egg, because that was simply impossible. However, Sumo was a special egg. Whoosh! In the instant that Sumo flew over with the bamboo pole in her hand, Li Yuanshu swung his sleeves and unleashed the pressure of the God-Slayer tribulation. However, that pressure had no effect on Sumo. Sumo's bamboo pole glowed with a green light. She was completely fearless. Li Yuanshu's white eyebrows twitched. The great perfection of the soul transformation realm before him seemed a little different. However, Li Yuanshu disdained to make a move against a soul transformation realm. Li Yuanshu reached out with one hand and grabbed at Sumo's broken bamboo pole. It was definitely a powerful suppression and also a form of absolute confidence, snatching the treasure with bare hands. However, how could Sumo let him succeed? Looking again, Sumo flipped her wrist, and the bamboo pole that was originally aimed at Li Yuanshu swept out horizontally. Whoosh! The sound of the wind suddenly rose like a green light splitting the air. Oomph! Li Yuanshu sneered. And at the moment when Sumo's bamboo pole swept over, Li Yuanshu actually disappeared without a trace. The God-Slayer tribulation movement technique was so fast that it could not be seen clearly. Sumo raised her eyebrows. The gap between their realms was still too big. At that moment, she really lost her perception of Li Yuanshu. However, Sumo's soul was alert, and she instinctively took a step forward. That was the safest position, she subconsciously thought. One should not underestimate this step of Sumo's. That step was a combination of 7th Senior Sister's array inheritance and Sumo's own magical movement technique. There was absolutely no such movement technique on Whitebone, and Sumo had just taken a step forward. Li Yuanshu's figure abruptly passed through Sumo's original position, like a bolt of white lightning, and also like a sharp treasured sword. Li Yuanshu's expression changed, because, in theory, it was impossible for a soul transformation realm expert to escape his God-Slayer attack. "Who are you?" Li Yuanshu asked. "Who am I?" Sumo sneered. "I'm the one who will kill you. I, Sumo, want to kill a God-Slayer today, and I've chosen you." "Chosen me?" "Ha ha." Li Yuanshu heard Sumo's words and could not help but laugh. At that moment, he no longer looked like an enlightened monk. "A mere soul transformation realm expert wants to kill me? You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth," Li Yuanshu said coldly. At the same time, his hands had already begun to form seals. White light and black light intertwined in his palms, like two divine dragons. Black and white, but endless colors were displayed. 9 Nether secret technique. At that moment, Linghu Yihuan could not help but shout, "Be careful." This warning came from Sumo. TSK. TSK. Guanxiong could not help but smack his lips, thinking, "Linghu Yihuan, I'm fighting for you. Why don't you care about me?" Sumo will not die. That guy has the power of the Holy Wheel protecting him. Whoosh! The black and white light, like a pair of dragon scissors, went straight for Sumo. Chapter 2:21. A white light flew out of Sumo's storage bag. Whoosh! A white skeleton charged at Li Yuanshu. Boom! Crack! Li Yuanshu's black and white light landed on the skeleton's body. The power of the divine tribulation could kill a soul transformation realm expert. However, the black and white light scattered in all directions. That white skeleton was not afraid at all. It was not injured at all. On the other hand, the skeleton didn't slow down at all as it went straight for Li Yuanshu. The skeleton broke through the air with a white light. At that moment, Li Yuanshu was slightly shocked. This was the first time he had met an opponent who used a skeleton as a weapon. Puppet technique. Most importantly, what kind of skeleton was that? How could it be unharmed under the power of his divine tribulation? Could it be the legendary immortal bone? The skeleton charged over and grabbed with one hand. Rays of white light shot out of its fingertips, like sword rays, straight at Li Yuanshu's heart. Li Yuanshu hurriedly retreated. At that moment, he felt an inexplicable power. That power was very strange. It could actually suppress his divine tribulation power. Could it be the undying chi? That was the only possibility Li Yuanshu could think of, because above the divine tribulation was the undying realm. And to be able to easily suppress a divine tribulation, it should be the undying chi. Could it be that this cyan-robed cultivator, Su Imo, was a cultivator in the undead realm? That thought flashed in Li Yuanshu's mind, but he immediately rejected it, because there could not be undying cultivators on the Bone Continent. Even if one cultivated to the divine tribulation realm, the undying realm was still out of reach. However, the aura of the white skeleton was indeed special. It should not be the undying chi, but it could indeed suppress a divine tribulation. In front of the white skeleton, Li Yuanshu felt an extremely strong sense of oppression. Whoosh! Li Yuanshu did not dare to face it head-on and could only retreat. But at the same time, his hands quickly formed a seal, but it was a kind of treasure control technique. Trap! Li Yuanshu shouted. His white robe billowed, his long eyebrows flying. Looking again, 2 rays of golden light shot out from his sleeves. The dazzling golden light seemed to be 2 magic rope-like treasures. Divine Dragon Binding Rope. Linghu Huan, who was watching from the side, exclaimed. At the same time, she slightly clenched her teeth and secretly pondered how many 9 nether magic treasures Li Yuanshu and Li Yuani had brought out back then. These Li brothers were absolutely the scum of the 9 underworlds. The divine dragon binding rope was invincible. It could bind divine dragons and trap divine tribulations. It was a high-level deity tribulation dharma treasure. There were only 7 in all of Jiuyo City, and Li Yuanshu actually had 2. Chi-Chi, the divine ropes pierced through the air like 2 sharp swords. Of the 2 divine ropes, one went straight for the white skeleton, while the other went straight for Sumo herself. The divine dragon binding rope was worthy of being a treasure of the netherworld. The white skeleton wanted to charge forward again. However, it was directly entangled by the golden light and bound from top to bottom. It struggled a few times. However, the divine dragon binding rope continued to shrink as it struggled. Finally, the skeleton was frozen in the air, unable to move. Sumo was stunned. The means of a deity tribulation cultivator were indeed extraordinary. In the entire White Bone Continent, there were very few Dharma treasures that could bind a white skeleton. Coincidentally, Li Yuanshu from the netherworld had one. At the same time, another golden light went straight for Sumo. Of course, Sumo was much more agile than the white skeleton. When she saw the golden light coming, she directly slid to the left. Teleportation was simply an insignificant skill for a soul transformation realm cultivator. However, he had never expected that. He had teleported, but the divine dragon binding rope could also teleport. The golden light was like a maggot in his bones, following him like a shadow. He couldn't get rid of it. Sumo raised her eyebrows. How could a deity tribulation dharma treasure be easily dodged? If it could be dodged, it wouldn't be able to bind a dragon. Sumo moved 3 times in a row. Her cyan-clothed figure flashed in the air. However, she still couldn't get rid of the divine dragon binding rope. The distance between the Dharma treasure and Sumo was getting closer and closer. In fact, everything happened in an instant. In the end, Sumo could only sneer and pat her bag of holding. Whoosh! Another flash of white light. It was another white skeleton that directly blocked between Sumo and the divine dragon binding rope. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Sumo's original intention was to use this white skeleton to intercept the divine dragon binding rope. However, she didn't expect that the divine dragon binding rope would directly bypass the white skeleton and go straight for Sumo. At that moment, Sumo was a little speechless. That was purely holding on to it. Why couldn't she block it? However, Sumo understood that she definitely couldn't be locked down by it. Otherwise, she would undoubtedly lose. Of course, Sumo still had Dharma treasures that she hadn't used. She just didn't want to expose too much of her strength. However, at this time, Sumo didn't have many choices. Looking again, Sumo's one hand shook. Whoosh, whoosh! A tattered cloth bag was directly tossed into the air by Sumo. The cloth bag wasn't big, extremely dirty, and extremely inconspicuous. However, at this moment, a layer of gray light rippled on the surface of the cloth bag. Tattered cloth bag. That was the last of Sumo's 3 treasures of the beggar world that he had found. For more than 100 years, Sumo repeatedly studied it and finally found that it was actually an invincible treasure. The tattered cloth bag really could contain tens of thousands of treasures. However, Sumo had tried it before. It was actually a soul transformation level Dharma treasure. Sometimes the tattered cloth bag didn't even contain it. Back then, Sumo had several nascent soul Dharma treasures on her. Even if she wanted to throw them into the tattered cloth bag, it was impossible. It turned out that among the Dharma treasures on Sumo's body, only the tattered bamboo pole and the copper bowl were qualified to enter the tattered cloth bag. Although the tattered cloth bag was tattered, it was very picky. At this time, Sumo tossed out the tattered cloth bag, of course, to collect the divine dragon binding rope. Such a powerful guy should be able to do it. Sumo was a little worried. If this didn't work, he could only use other means. Whoosh, whoosh, sure enough, when the tattered cloth bag opened, if one could look inside, they would find that there was a faint gray gas inside. At the same time, there were 15 paper-thin skeletons arranged in the cloth bag. Inside the tattered cloth bag, there was another world. As soon as the tattered cloth bag appeared, it instantly emitted an endless suction force. The divine dragon binding rope almost didn't struggle and was directly collected. At that moment, not only was Li Yuanchu dumbfounded, even Ling Hu, He Huan, was shocked. Master Mute even frowned slightly, because the tattered cloth bag was so overbearing. There was no room for negotiation. When Sumo saw this, he couldn't help but sneer. The tattered cloth bag really didn't let him down. Then, Sumo's mind moved. The tattered cloth bag went straight to the bound white skeleton. Whoosh! The endless suction force couldn't be resisted at all. At that moment, Li Yuanchu wanted to take back the divine dragon binding rope, but it was already impossible. Even the skeleton and the rope were directly collected. Whoosh! At the same time, Sumo's mind moved again. From the tattered cloth bag, 3 white skeletons directly flew out. A total of 4. The current Sumo was no longer the same as before. The current Sumo didn't need to use the red dust ancient fan to freely control all the white skeletons. However, he still couldn't control the golden skeletons. Suppress. Destroy. Sumo shouted. White skeleton technique. The seal in Sumo's hand changed, and the 4 white skeletons went straight to Li Yuanchu from 4 directions. The power of Silent Death Valley was unmatched. Chapter 222. For white skeletons came from all directions. Li Yuanchu instantly felt endless pressure, as if the entire void was squeezing him. That kind of power that could suppress even deity tribulation transcendence came from every single skeleton. To be honest, other than the Mute Master, Li Yuanchu never thought he would meet such a strong opponent. And Sumo's realm was only at the great perfection of the soul transformation realm. Was there such a soul transformation expert in the White Bone continent? Li Yuanchu had never heard of Sumo's name, but Sumo's magic treasures and techniques were too powerful. The pressure that the 4 skeletons brought to Li Yuanchu was no less than the 4 deities, or even more. 100,000 years ago, they crawled out of the 9 underworlds, narrowly escaping death. It was a miracle. For 100,000 years, they never lost their ambition. They wanted to control this peerless skeleton that fell in the Pure Land, and they were achieving their goal step by step. Now, how could they let Sumo stop them? Li Yuanchu's eyes emitted a dark light. That pair of eyes was like an eternal abyss. At the same time, Li Yuanchu's aura seemed to be suppressed by Sumo's white skeletons, and suddenly rebounded. Whoosh, whoosh! The aura emitted from Li Yuanchu's body had already transformed. Black and white alternated and instantly spread out like a wheel. They protected Li Yuanchu within, and Li Yuanchu put his palms together, slightly closing his eyes. It was a Buddhist posture, but it was full of demonic nature. The servants didn't quite understand why he was acting like that, but in an instant, the power he emitted directly blocked the 4 skeletons 7 zhang away. The four skeletons could not advance any further. At this time, Sumo understood that she could only rely on the power of Silent Death Valley and the Red Dust Ancient Fan to fight against Li Yuanshu. The others could not withstand a single blow, because the two of them were not on the same level. If Sumo did not handle it well, there would definitely be problems. So, Sumo's hand seals changed. That was a variation of the skeleton technique. Looking again, the four skeletons also formed seals at the same time. It was a very strange scene. The four skeletons were actually forming hand seals in a very proper manner. Furthermore, their hand seals were not the same. For skeletons, 4 hand seals, and 4 spells. That was the secret technique of the unwithering art. No one had seen Sumo's Dao technique before. Seeing Sumo's moves, Mute couldn't help but frown, because he seemed to have a vague memory of Sumo's technique. However, that memory probably didn't happen on the Bone Continent. In other words, Sumo's technique was definitely not something derived from his continent. However, that kind of memory was already somewhat unreal. The Mute Man had forgotten too many things. Heaven, earth, wind, thunder. That was the meaning of the 4 seals of the white bone and skull. Sumo's Taoist technique shocked all the skeletal cultivators who were watching the battle, because the skeleton puppet could understand. Although there were very few cultivators who used white bones as puppets, there were definitely quite a number of cultivators who cultivated the puppet technique. However, they had never seen a puppeteer who could make his own puppets form hand seals. With one technique, 4 seals were formed. Sumo's seal was completed, and the 4 skeletons' techniques were also completed. The 4 skeletons, for rays of light, divided into purple, white, gold, and green. They attacked Li Yuanshu from 4 different directions, like 4 light swords. The 4 light swords directly divided Li Yuanshu's black and white wheel into 4 pieces. However, Li Yuanshu was still as steady as Mount Tai, his hands clasped together. At that moment, he seemed to have entered a meditative state, no longer concerned about the outside world. Chi. The rays of light were like knives, moving forward on the black and white were like electric arcs, making hissing sounds. In an instant, the 4 rays of light were about to hit Li Yuanshu. However, the corner of Li Yuanshu's mouth curved. His clasped hands posture did not change. Sumo had a bad feeling in her heart, because that Li Yuanshu was too indifferent. And at that moment, Li Yuanshu's posture suddenly changed. Mirror technique. A low shout came from somewhere. Li Yuanshu's real body, in fact, had already disappeared. In the center of the wheel, what was left was a mirror image. And at this moment, the white skeletons were standing in 4 different directions. They faced each other. The moment Li Yuanshu's real body disappeared, everything in the center was like a mirror. Therefore, at this moment, the technique became a reflection and a counterattack of their techniques. Boom, bang, heaven against earth, wind against thunder. Purple, white, gold, and green, 4 rays of light, shot up to the sky and scattered. And not only that, the mirror technique also reflected a large part of the power back. The 4 big skeletons at the same time hurriedly retreated, because at that moment it was equivalent to them giving themselves a full blow. Sumo used all her strength to control the 4 big skeletons to retreat, but it was still a bit too late. Bang, 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 bang. The 4 big skeletons, almost all hit by the power of the rebound, slightly trembled. At that moment, even Sumo's expression changed, his dance sea churned. Fortunately, he had already cultivated the unwithered bones. It could be said that Sumo's bones were not inferior to the white skeletons at all. It was definitely not something that his soul transformation realm cultivator could fight against. However, today, since he cultivated the skeleton technique, it was the first time he suffered such a heavy injury. And at this moment, the most important thing was not the failure of the skeleton technique. Rather, it was that Li Yuanshu's real body disappeared. The mirror technique, just now, was only a virtual image. Sumo's reaction was already extremely fast. This time, he did not instinctively take a step forward, but with a thought, the ancient secular fan directly flew out. At the same time, The remaining 4 white skeletons also flew out. The skeleton that was trapped just now had already escaped. The god dragon binding rope naturally became Sumo's possession. Whoosh, swoosh, the ancient secular fan in the void opened. The skeleton in the ancient secular fan also flew out. At this moment, the 9 white skeletons that Sumo could control all appeared, and the ancient secular fan was already in Sumo's hand. At that moment, all the white skeletons' cultivators were dumbfounded. This cultivator named Sumo, what was her background? Because they had almost never heard of the name Sumo. Could it be that she was also a descendant of the immortal void realm? A strange light flashed in Linghu Hehuan's eyes, because she thought of the forbidden area on the White Bone mainland. Sumo's power must have come from the Holy Wheel ancient site, or perhaps from the Silent Death Valley. Could she control the power of the Silent Death Valley? That was really too terrifying. Gods came to bury, and immortals came to return to silence. This made Linghu Hehuan's heart tremble. Linghu Hehuan dared to break into the night of the 1,000 Desolation Temple, but she absolutely did not dare to enter the Silent Death Valley. Sumo. Linghu Hehuan looked at Sumo and could not help but curl the corner of her mouth. At that moment, Linghu was really flirtatious, and at the same time, a trace of slyness flashed in her eyes. However, at this moment, a ray of light suddenly appeared above Sumo's head. That ray of light was extremely sudden. In fact, Sumo had been guarding against Li Yuanshu. Chapter 223. Li Yuanshu suddenly fell like Mount Tai. At that moment, there was already an immortal sword in his hand. The immortal sword also had a black and white Buddhist light. This change was indeed not what Sumo had expected. He really did not sense Li Yuanshu appear from above. The concealment of the deity's tribulation aura was really not something Sumo could compare with. At this time, Sumo wanted to dodge, but it was too late. Originally, the broken bamboo pole was above Sumo's head. However, Li Yuanshu's immortal sword directly pierced through the bamboo pole's defense. After all, the bamboo pole was not a defensive magic weapon. It was only temporarily used by Sumo in the air. At this moment, there was only a head-on collision. Sumo could not dodge. Looking again, Sumo raised the ancient secular fan in his hand and directly covered his head. The ancient secular fan was also not a defensive magic weapon, but at this time, Sumo had nothing else to use. He hoped to block Li Yuanshu's sword of tribulation. Chi! Boom! Li Yuanshu's sword hit the ancient secular fan. The power of the tribulation. The immortal sword of tribulation. The power of the tribulation was enough to kill Sumo. Fortunately, the ancient secular fan suddenly lit up with endless red light. The red light filled the sky with a mysterious aura. Previously, even the red-dressed Mu Jinghong had to retreat from the ancient secular fan. Li Yuanshu's heart shook again. At the same time, he directly turned back, dispelling the power of the ancient secular fan. Why did Sumo have so many strange treasures on her body? But how could the power of the tribulation be underestimated? Li Yuanshu's attack was absolutely with all his strength. He originally wanted to take Sumo's life. If not for the ancient secular fan, Sumo would undoubtedly die. Even so, Sumo felt the power of the tribulation surging like a wave, simply unstoppable, even if it was just the aftermath. Boom! Sumo flew out directly. However, Sumo did not fly out voluntarily, but was thrown out by the force. Wah! Wah! Sumo flew several thousand feet away. At that moment, Sumo felt her dantian churn. Unable to control herself, she spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood. It had been a long time since Sumo suffered such an injury. At the same time, Sumo felt as if there were endless electric arcs scurrying all over her body and ants biting her, making her feel extremely numb. The power of the divine tribulation lingered in the air. Sumo spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood, but her body was still numb, and she couldn't move immediately. When experts exchange blows, it only took an instant. Although the red dust fan automatically emitted a red glow, it only reduced a portion of Li Yuanshu's divine tribulation power. Li Yuanchu himself did not suffer much damage. Therefore, Li Yuanchu's body suddenly turned in the air and once again rushed toward Sumo. Sumo's mind moved. The 9 skeletons immediately flew up and blocked in front of Sumo. However, Li Yuanchu's speed was too fast. Before the 9 skeletons could completely block in front of Sumo, Li Yuanchu's sword light had already arrived. This was because Li Yuanchu was indeed worried about the skeletons. The power that originated from Silent Death Valley prevented him from fully unleashing the power of the divine tribulation. Therefore, Li Yuanchu increased his speed to the extreme. He wanted to end this quickly. A white light, faster than lightning. When the 9 skeletons were flying towards Sumo, the white light was already one step ahead. Sumo raised her eyebrows. The power of the divine tribulation was bone-chilling. At that moment, Sumo really felt the threat of death. At this time, most of the people present could no longer see the battle between Sumo and Li Yuanchu. Li Yuanchu's sword light attacked, but Sumo still couldn't move. Linghu Huan, on the other hand, could see everything clearly, but there was nothing he could do. At that crucial moment, Sumo felt an extremely gentle force behind her, instantly supporting her. Then, Sumo was dragged along, and he suddenly retreated. Boom! At the same time, a Buddhist bead flew out of the void. The Buddhist bead was the size of a walnut, and its entire body glowed with reddish-brown light. It tore through the air and even had a 3-foot-long tail. Sumo retreated, while the Buddhist bead moved forward. Crack! The Buddhist bead directly blocked the tip of Li Yuanchu's sword. The 2 divine tribulation powers collided, and suddenly a shock wave spread out layer by layer, sweeping the sky at the same time. This was a true divine tribulation showdown. In fact, it was even more intense than the clash between Guanxiong and Li Yuanyi. At this time, Guanxiong and Li Yuanyi were in a state of constant fighting. This was because Guanxiong knew that if he didn't use that method, he wouldn't be Li Yuanyi's match. Sumo was a good example. If they really fought head-on, it wouldn't work. At this time, a figure in gray had already blocked in front of Li Yuanchu. He was dressed in a gray robe, and he was tall and thin, looking slightly frail. It was none other than Master Mute. In his hand, he was holding a string of Buddhist beads. There should be 108 Buddhist beads, but at this time, only one was missing. Just now, Master Mute took out a Buddhist bead, but it was a few times bigger. Whoosh! Master Mute waved one hand, and a reddish-brown light flew back and landed directly on his Buddhist bead. Master Mute straightened one palm and looked coldly at Li Yuanchu. Li Yuanchu put away the immortal sword in his hand, then actually bowed to Master Mute. Master Mute, are you really going to fight? Master Mute looked at Li Yuanchu and slowly nodded. Sigh. Li Yuanchu let out a long sigh. However, at this time, no one could tell whether his sigh was real or fake. We've been friends for tens of thousands of years. I really regret it. Master Mute shook his head and smiled faintly, because, in his view, there was nothing in the entire Pure Land that could be regretted. If one had crossed the ocean, how could one be water? Master Mute had already experienced too much pain in the reincarnation cycle. At this moment, the Mute Master did not speak, but the string of Buddhist beads in his hand had begun to shine. Li Yuanchu's eyes narrowed as he stared at the string of prayer beads. They had known each other for tens of thousands of years and lived together for 10,000 years. Not long after the death of Shengluan, Mute came to Wanhuang Temple and never left. In 10,000 years, Li Yuanchu had yet to comprehend the Mute Warrior, because the Mute Warrior never spoke. However, Li Yuanchu understood that it was impossible for a great cultivator of the deity tribulation realm to be a mute. The Mute Master just didn't want to talk. Li Yuanchu had never seen that string of prayer beads before. Just now, a prayer bead had blocked his divine tribulation flying sword. How could it be a mortal object? Thus, Li Yuanchu did not dare to take the risk at this moment. In his opinion, the Mute Warrior was his strongest opponent. Li Yuanchu first looked at the other group's battle. The battle between Li Yuanyi and Guanxiong was not very intense. That was because Li Yuanyi had never used his full strength. As twin brothers, Li Yuanyi and Li Yuanshu shared the same spirit. Since the mute warrior was going to make a move, they had no choice but to use their ultimate means. That was their trump card. Whoosh, whoosh. Looking again, Li Yuanyi suddenly cast 2 spells with the goal of forcing Guanxiong to retreat. As expected, Guanxiong retreated. Li Yuanyi and Li Yuanshu flew towards the top of the Bitter Soul Pagoda at the same time. One black and one white, the 2 brothers stood at the top of the pagoda like a mirror image. Chapter 224. Black and white opposed each other, merging. Li Yuanshu and Li Yuanyi slowly merged into one. But the merging of the 2 was very interesting, because they each occupied one side. The merged person could not be called Li Yuanshu, nor could he be called Li Yuanyi. Half black and half white, as if half of the person and his own shadow were stuck together. But the merged person's cultivation level was rising. Late-stage deity tribulation. Guanxiong's expression changed, because the black and white person's aura made Guanxiong feel suppressed. Seeing this, the mute master also frowned. At this time, in terms of cultivation level, Li Yuanshu and Li Yuanyi's merged person was above him. Actually, this was the scene the mute master did not want to see the most. But it was not because the mute master was powerless, but because he knew what Li Yuanshu and Li Yuanyi were going to do. Until the last moment, the mute master did not want to use his trump card. At that moment, the mute master's eyes flashed with pity. He was not pitying Li Yuanshu and Li Yuanyi, but the beings of the White Bone Continent. He chanted in his heart, Amit Ba, good, good. At this time, all the cultivators present held their breaths, watching this strange scene. Most of them could not see Li Yuanshu and Li Yuanyi's cultivation level. They could only feel a terrifying aura. Right now, they could only be spectators who had no choice. In front of the strong, the weak were so pitiful. Their life and death were completely out of their control. Everyone, I don't want to do this, but you forced me. That was Li Yuanshu's voice, filled with sadness and helplessness. If one did not know, they would really think they were the victims. At the top of the Bitter Soul Tower, the black and white person's clothes fluttered in the wind. 2 long eyebrows, one black and one white like a ghostly long beard. Looking again, layers of black energy rolled up from the bottom of the Bitter Soul Tower, like coiling dragons, rising up. In an instant, they wrapped around the entire Bitter Soul Tower. Rumble. The Bitter Soul Tower slowly rose, this time leaving the White Bone Continent, completely hanging in the air. Howl! Jie! At that moment, ghostly wails and wolf howls sounded again. Those who sleep will eventually awaken. Those who do not die will definitely be reborn. Li Yuanshu's voice sounded again. The voice reverberated like a Sanskrit song, but it also sounded like an endless oracle. Ma and I pad me. Forgive? Li Yuanshu put his palms together, still in the posture of a monk. As he chanted the incantation, the Bitter Soul Pagoda shrunk rapidly until it turned into a 3-inch tall black pagoda. After that, it hid itself between the brows of the fused man. Whoosh, whoosh, the realm of the body integration stage rose again. Deity tribulation, great circle. A terrifying aura instantly enveloped everything. That aura was like the wind, sweeping through everything in its path. Boom, boom, hua. The entire temple of 10,000 desolation instantly turned into ruins. Regardless of whether it was the front yard or the backyard, everything collapsed at that moment and turned into ashes. 100,000 years of foundation was destroyed in a day. At this moment, it wasn't just the 10,000-year-old temple that was like this. Some of the cultivators with lower cultivation levels who were watching the battle were also directly annihilated. Mute Shi, Guanxiong, Sumo, Linghu Huan, and the others tried their best to protect everyone, but it was not enough. At this moment, cultivators below the nascent soul realm had already lost the ability to protect themselves. At this moment, Sumo could already move. He quickly formed a hand seal. Among his 9 skeletons, other than one that was guarding him, the others stood in 8 different directions like door guardians. Then he slapped his storage pouch, and 8 colorful flags flew out. The flags were of 8 different colors, each different from the other. These array flags were left to him by his 6th senior brother, Liu Tianzhan. The 8 colorful flags were all advanced nascent soul realm magic treasures. Although they couldn't fight against the deity's tribulation cultivators, Sumo could use them to set up arrays. 8 skeletons, 8 colorful flags. Sumo's array was inherited from his 7th senior sister. No one in the Whitebone realm could match it. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The colorful flags fluttered in the wind, and the skeletons scattered light. In an instant, the light intertwined and formed a large array. Then it protected everyone in the center. Although the deity's tribulation aura was powerful, it couldn't break through Sumo's array, because it was equivalent to setting up a small silent death valley. It was just that the others didn't know about it. After this battle, Sumo's name would spread far and wide. However, at this moment, the Lee brothers' goal wasn't to kill the person in front of them. Instead, they wanted to summon the entire Whitebone continent. At this moment, the entire Immortal Temple was razed to the ground. Millions of black gas surged up from the ground, and the entire Immortal Temple was overflowing with demonic energy. If one looked from afar, they would see black smoke soaring into the sky above the Thousand Desolation Mountain. Endless black clouds were forming above the entire southern bone continent. Even at night, the black clouds gave off a feeling of the end of the world. This night was destined to be extraordinary. This night was destined to be eternal. All the cultivators and even mortals in the southern bone continent felt that something big was about to happen, because they all felt an indescribable aura coming from the entire Whitebone continent. Many people were startled awake from their dreams and looked around in confusion. Cultivators could sense strands of devil chi, while mortals could sense a bone-piercing chill. Boom, boom. The entire Immortal Temple was shaking slightly. The Thousand Desolation Mountain collapsed. Sumo and Guanxiong were very familiar with this feeling, because it was the rhythm of Whitebone waking up and breathing. Guanxiong's expression was extremely ugly. He didn't understand why this was happening. 100 years ago, he and Feng Shi had just sealed Whitebone. His 7 chess pieces were treasures even more powerful than the undead divine weapon. The seal of the 7 suns' soul-suppressing technique would never be broken. If that was the case, why would Whitebone still move? Moreover, this rhythm was extremely similar to before. Linghu Yihuan seemed to see the doubt in Guanxiong's eyes and laughed bitterly. Immortal Void Realm's inheritor, 9 Underworlds has a technique called soul creation. This technique can damage the mind and soul and create new life. Create new life? Guanxiong couldn't help but frown. But this place is Whitebone's feet. The soul enters from the feet and travels through the limbs, going against everything from bottom to top. Similarly, it can regenerate Whitebone. However, the awakened Whitebone is already under the control of the soul creator. Actually, this is equivalent to destroying a soul and creating a new one. Whitebone is still Whitebone, but it's no longer what it used to be. Everyone heard Linghu Yihuan's explanation. However, many people didn't understand. This was because the cultivators born on the Whitebone continent didn't know that the Whitebone continent was actually a set of Whitebone. However, Master Mute and Sumo both understood. What a powerful technique, Guanxiong said. At the same time, a hint of worry flashed across his eyes. He couldn't help but look at the red dust fan in Sumo's hand. At this moment, the pendant wasn't shining. It was the Whitebone's heart. In fact, as long as Sumo could control the Whitebone's heart, the entire Whitebone continent would be in Sumo's hands. However, Guanxiong didn't tell this secret to Sumo. Given Sumo's current realm, she didn't have the ability to completely control Whitebone. Meanwhile, Li Yuanchu's technique continued. In the void, the fused person's hand seal changed again. Crack! The sky fell and the earth cracked. The entire 10,000 Desolation Mountain was actually split in half along the mountain path. Boom, boom, boom. The earth shook and the mountains were about to split. Master Mute closed his eyes and felt helpless. Chapter 225. The sky was falling and the earth was collapsing. It was like the end of the world. The black and white fusion figure stood in the air like a demon. Li Yuanchu's incantation was still echoing in the air. It was like the call of the end of the world. The entire southern region of the Bone Continent was shaking. That feeling was even spreading from the southern region to the central region and then to the northern region. Li Yuanchu's technique was a lever that could move everything. Create the soul. Li Yuanchu's voice boomed like thunder. The black gas in the air instantly condensed into a circle. At first, it was huge, but then it shrank rapidly. In an instant, it condensed into a palm-sized ball. Soul ball, Linghu Yihuan exclaimed. She knew that as long as the soul ball could fall into the depths of the bone continent and travel along the meridians of the bones, it could awaken the bones. The souls of the bones would be controlled by Li Yuanchu. Boom, boom, the entire 1,000 Desolation Mountain was still splitting. A bottomless abyss had appeared in the middle of the mountain. Black gas surged in the abyss like waves. Soul return. Li Yuanchu's voice sounded again. At the same time, the fusion figure's hand seal changed again. Whoosh! That soul ball was like a fish swimming into the abyss. At that moment, the mute master's hand seal was completed. His hand seal looked extremely simple. The mute master only put his palms together, and a string of prayer beads coiled around his hand. The mute master's lips moved, but no sound came out. In this life, the mute master might have forgotten his own voice. However, at that moment, the mute master's expression was solemn, and his eyes were filled with pity. That was because his technique required the power of all beings in the bones. Otherwise, it would not be able to suppress the bones. Furthermore, when the black soul ball entered the abyss, it had already entered the meridians of the bone continent. That soul ball turned into a stream of light and headed north. It was moving along the meridians of the bones. However, at that moment, the mute master's technique was completed. 3,000 li away, White Lotus Town. The old shaman did not sleep that night. At this moment, he had already changed into a brand new white robe. That white robe was what he wore every year when he presided over the sacrifice. However, no one understood why he was dressed so grandly tonight. In fact, when the old priest changed into his white robe and walked out of his house to the small square, almost no one saw him, because in White Lotus Town, in the dead of night, everything was silent. Walking through the entire town, the old priest looked at everything with a smile. He hoped that everything would always be so peaceful. Tuck, tuck, the old priest's footsteps were very rhythmic. The sound of footsteps echoed on the bluestone path. The old priest had already arrived at the small square and was beside the lotus sculpture. That lotus was slender and elegant, ready to bloom. It was as white as jade, vivid and lifelike. It was as if a cool breeze was blowing, and in the next moment, it would unhurriedly open. Even at night, the lotus sculpture seemed to be emitting a faint light. The old shaman used his old arm to gently stroke the lotus. Perhaps in the eyes of the townspeople, the lotus was merely a statue or a totem, but in the eyes of the old priest, the lotus was a living existence. In fact, the old priest could even feel its pulse and fragrance. Chi chi chi. On 1,000 Desolation Mountain, when the demonic energy surged into the sky, the old priest saw it clearly. However, there was no panic in his eyes. Instead, there was a hint of a smile, because the ultimate value of his existence was for this day. The love monk, the holy monk. Even though it was only an ethereal legend on the continent of bones, they all believed that it had once existed. Of course, the old priest believed it even more. We are all willing to sacrifice for you. No, or rather, we are all willing to sacrifice for all living beings. A true Buddha does not care if you have a soul or a soulless person. Even without a soul or path, you will still exist forever, because all living beings are equal. Even if you are a plant, you're still a living being, let alone the person on the continent of bones. Buddha is merciful. The old priest bowed in the direction of 1,000 Desolation Temple. Chi chi chi. Chi chi chi. Traces of demonic energy and coldness came from the continent of bones. However, The old priest clasped his hands together and remained unmoved. However, his expression was even more solemn. At that moment, there was a Buddha in his heart. To him, what was about to arrive was the most sacred moment. As expected, not even a moment had passed. Endless Sanskrit sounds rang in the old priest's ears. Those were true Sanskrit sounds. Only the 3,000 priests on the continent of bones could understand them. Namo, ho, ho, do, hang, dirank, yeah, polu jamper, blinking bowl. Buddha is merciful. This disciple is willing to use his body to light the lamp. Buddha lotus demon suppression. The old priest replied in a clear voice. Actually, no one could hear his reply, but he had to say it. May all living beings be happy and free from the sea of suffering. The old priest's hands changed and formed a seal that he only knew in his life. He could only form that seal once in his life, because that technique would absorb his life force. As his hands changed, the old priest's expression was holy and natural. Whoosh! When he looked again, the old priest's body suddenly lit up with endless brilliance. Buddhist light shone from his white robe. At the same time, a flame flickered between the old priest's brows. Lamplighter. The old priest was the lamplighter. However, they used their bodies as a guide and their souls to light the lamp. Whoosh! As the light flickered between the old priest's brows, his entire body was withering, because his life force was burning. Then, the old priest's body started to dissipate. That dissipation came from the bottom up. The old priest's body slowly turned into specks of starlight. The old priest's expression was calm and at ease. At the very last moment, the old priest's smile disappeared. Whoosh! The flame flickered and the old priest turned into a lamp. Then, the lamp landed on the lotus statue. Whoosh! The lotus immediately gave off a strange light. Immortal energy rippled and rippled. The lotus came to life and gave off a myriad of lights. The lamp landed in the stamen of the flower. The lamp and the lotus became one, the Buddhist light shining on the infinite worlds. At this time, the entire White Lotus town was as bright as day. Everyone in the town woke up from their dreams, because at that moment, they felt a tremor that came from their souls. Unfortunately, they didn't see what the old priest did. Between the infinite worlds, many people and many things were like this. They protected you, but you never knew it. They watched over you without saying a word, and they would even die for you. Mute was like this, and so was the old priest. As the lotus swayed, the entire White Lotus town seemed to have come from the Buddhist realm. And such a thing was happening at the same time in every town within a 10,000-mile radius. That kind of sacrifice, that kind of death, that kind of decisiveness, that kind of living for the masses. That kind of true Buddhist heart. 3,000 lotus could suppress bones. No one could tell when these Buddhist lotuses were planted, and no one could tell who planted them. But on this night, all the lotus bloomed. Beneath the bones, there really were meridians. Then these white lotuses were nails hammered into these meridians. The bones were pinned down by the lotus. The so-called soul mass had no way to go, no way to hide. Chapter 226. White bones giving birth to lotuses, lotus suppressing white bones. That was definitely an earth-shattering technique. At this moment, someone was looking down at the white bone continent from high up in the sky. That person in purple dress could not help but smile bitterly. Lotuses could really form under the feet of the white bones. This was something that she had never thought of. Just like that, the white bones could be said to be nailed to the Pure Land world, unable to cause any more waves. In the future, only those who could pluck lotuses could open the seal. But who was that monk? He frowned slightly, because that earth-shattering technique was a lotus technique. The so-called lotus technique was not an ordinary existence. In theory, in the Pure Land world, there should not be anyone who could use the lotus technique. Moreover, on the white bone continent. However, that young monk had done the impossible. But even Ze could not see through mute. Thus, she could only smile faintly and form a seal with one hand. A ray of light emitted from her palm. Within the light, a small sound transmission paper crane appeared. The paper crane spread its wings, piercing through space and time. And at some unknown place, the paper crane landed in the hands of a girl in white dress. The girl in white took the paper crane and then sent out spiritual power from her palm. Let Guan Xiong return. The white bone continent should not have any more waves. There is no point in him being a patrol envoy. A faint but pleasant voice came from the paper crane. When the girl in white heard this, the corner of her mouth curled up. Fatty Guan, you are free. Hee hee. The girl in white put away the paper crane and muttered to herself. Then, she took a step forward and disappeared without a trace. The border of the white bone continent was filled with sky trenches. The sky trenches were bottomless, and waves of air surged. Legend said that there were tens of thousands of demons and spirits in the sky trenches. The sky trenches hid all the grievances, helplessness, and pain of the Pure Land world. They roared and laughed, hissed day and night. Some said that below the sky trenches was seawater. That seawater was the tears of all the people in the Pure Land world. Their tears formed an ocean, and their blood turned into demons. 3,000 li of the border of the white bone continent was already barren and devoid of life, because they were too close to the sky trenches. Above the sky trenches was endless fog that covered the sky and covered the earth. No one knew how deep the chasm was, and no one knew how long it was. However, the heavenly chasm existed between the continents of the Pure Land world. The Pure Land heavenly chasm could not be crossed unless one was a deity tribulation. It was a physical barrier between the continents. Only deity tribulation cultivators could cross the heaven chasm and reach another continent. At this moment, a purple lotus platform flew over from a sky ditch. The purple lotus platform seemed to have appeared out of thin air because it had pierced through space-time to arrive. A white-clothed girl sat on the lotus platform. She had a delicate appearance and a spirited gaze. The purple lotus platform emitted a faint purple light. Within the heavenly trench, everything had to retreat because of it. Wherever the lotus platform passed, everything within 1,000 feet was clear. None of the demons in the heaven trench dared to approach. In fact, as soon as the purple lotus throne passed through, the enraged howls within the heaven trench ceased. At this moment, on Mount Wanwang, Li Yuanchu and Li Yuani's combined body had already sunk into silence, because they also saw lotus flowers blooming on the ground within a perimeter of the 1,000 Desolation Temple. At that moment, it was as if the entire southern bone region was filled with Buddhist energy. The Buddhist energy was dense, and the lotus flowers were endless. The entire southern bone region was illuminated by Buddhist light. It was as if the world had changed. At this moment, all of the small town's residents had awakened. They spontaneously gathered at their respective plazas, praying, kneeling. The thoughts of all living beings gathered within the Buddhist lotus, forming an ocean-like power that poured into the white bone meridians. 3,000 Buddha lotus? Li Yuanchu's voice rang out. The 3,000 Buddha lotus was actually a legend that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years in the white bone continent. Many people thought that it was just an unrealistic fantasy. In fact, for many years, everyone thought that the one who planted the Buddhist lotus was the 1,000 Desolation Temple. The 1,000 Desolation Temple enjoyed its success and never explained. Thus, the 1,000 Desolation Temple was extremely popular. It was endlessly beautiful. However, only after this night did they realize that there was a true Buddha in the 1,000 Desolation Temple, but it was not the unaging monk. Li Yuanchu and Li Yuani obviously knew about the 3,000 Buddha lotus, but they did not think much of it, because they never thought that the mute monk from 10,000 years ago could actually activate the 3,000 Buddha lotus. One Buddhist lotus, one nail, 3,000 Buddha lotuses determine life and death. At this moment, the soul ball had not even left the white bone southern region when it was nailed into the white bone meridians by the Buddhist lotus. It could not move at all. Rumble, rumble, the soul ball kept struggling and crashing in the white bone meridians. However, it was all to no avail. In the white-boned southern region, mountains collapsed and rivers flowed in reverse. There were even places that were destroyed by the soul ball struggle. Countless mortals and immortals died. However, all of this could not change the fate of the soul ball being nailed to death. Li Yuanchu's expression was extremely ugly. This far exceeded their expectations. The mute monk should be like them, not an existence from the white-bone continent. Otherwise, he would not have such power. Mute monk, you are not a white-bone man? Where are you from? Li Yuanchu's voice asked. However, the mute monk shook his head lightly. He did not speak, as if he did not want to answer Li Yuanchu's question. The white-boned southern region, the legend of the love monk. You're talking about you, right? Li Yuanchu's voice asked again, because he could not accept this. 100,000 years, all for nothing. Love monk? Those two words seemed to have moved the mute monk. A strange look flashed across his eyes, and then he finally nodded. At that moment, even Sumo was shocked, because when he saw the children's game, he thought that it was about the founder of the Wanhuang Temple. But how could the mute monk be the love monk? All of this, regardless of time or space, does not match. Isn't the mute monk the fourth disciple of the Holy Wheel? Sumo had doubts in her heart, and she habitually looked at Guan Xiong, who was not far away. Guan Xiong laughed bitterly, then shook his head. Sumo, I can only tell you that I have heard of a cultivation state called rebirth state. However, I do not know how much higher that state is than the undead state. To me, it is an unreachable existence. Legend has it that people in the rebirth state can come back as they wish. Guan Xiong transmitted his voice. At that moment, Sumo's heart shook, because there was a state called rebirth state. Rebirth state. At that moment, Sumo thought of the senior brothers and sisters of the Windwheel sect. At that moment, Sumo also thought of Mu Jinghong, who had amazed the White Bones for 3,000 years. Sumo, 3 lifetimes is one. I will wait for you in rebirth. You will meet me again. That sentence rang in Sumo's ears again. A flame rose in Sumo's heart. That was a wisp of passion that her withered heart had never had in 100 years. Actually, Guan Xiong had said that there must be rebirth. However, Sumo did not believe it. But at this moment, only rebirth could explain everything about the mute monk. Just now, he saw the mute monk nod with his own eyes. The mute monk admitted that he was the love monk. Then, of course, there must be rebirth. Sumo's hands trembled slightly because of excitement. Chapter 227. The Love Monk. The skeletal cultivators looked at each other. Even the Bliss Palace Lord, Linghu Huan, was slightly taken aback. Which cultivator in the southern region didn't know about the legend of the Love Monk? There were many versions of the legend of the Love Monk. He swore to fight against demons with a merciful heart. He shaved his hair for love and lost all hope. Regardless of the story, he was a man of love and righteousness, a merciful and compassionate man in all versions. The moment the mute man nodded, everyone turned to look at the gray-robed monk. They didn't even believe it. Was that young monk really the love monk? There was sorrow in the mute man's eyes, but there was also compassion. He put his palms together, and the Buddhist beads in his hands rotated gently. Perhaps one revolution was a lifetime. Rebirth state. Li Yuanchu's voice was trembling, because even for him, that was a realm that was far beyond his reach. However, the mute man before him was only a mid-stage deity tribulation cultivator. Therefore, Li Yuanchu and Li Yuani's fusion cultivator thought there was still hope. After all, they were peak deity tribulation cultivators. If the mute man was the love monk, it only proved that he used to be in the rebirth state. However, he might not have reached that level in this life. Controlling the skeletons was no longer possible. They could only fight to the death. That was what Li Yuanchu and Li Yuani were thinking. Whoosh! The fusion cultivator hissed at the sky and howled like a demon. His hands formed a seal, and the black and white light once again rose from their bodies. Deity Tribulation Cultivator. That aura still enveloped the Desolation Mountain. Die. Li Yuanchu's voice suddenly shouted. Boom! The fusion man's surroundings suddenly shone with light. The light was formless. However, it turned into thousands of wind blades in an instant and swept toward the mute man, Guan Xiong, Sumo, and the others. It was an indiscriminate deity tribulation technique. Boom, boom, the sky fell and the earth cracked. Rocks flew everywhere. Everything in the path of the deity tribulation wind blades turned into ashes. However, at this time, the cultivators who were still alive were basically in Sumo's array formation. The formation was as stable as a mountain because it was guarded by 9 skeletons. Not even the power of a peak deity tribulation cultivator could break it. On the contrary, rays of gray light started to radiate from the white skeleton. There was even a faint mist rising. Others might not know about that fog, but Sumo knew that it was the fog in the Still Death Valley. Boom! Crack! At that moment, the combined bodies of Li Yuanshu and Li Yuani seemed to have gone mad, constantly attacking Sumo's formation. It seemed like he was going to fulfill his promise. Everyone, no one can leave today. In fact, the Li brothers could choose to leave at this moment. And with the mute man's temperament, he might not do anything to them. But now, they had completely lost their minds. 100,000 years of scheming, all for naught. Who could be so calm and collected? Therefore, it was completely normal for him to go crazy or even hysterical at this time. Moreover, the Li brothers understood that they had no other way out. Nether City would never forgive those who failed to control white bones and raise demons. Linghu Huan was just a pathfinder. No one knew better than them exactly what sort of power the 9th Nether City possessed and what it meant. The city at the bottom of the bitter Samsara Sea was their nightmare. Therefore, at this moment, they no longer had too many goals. They only wanted to kill, to vent their anger. Howl! Kiki! The combined bodies continued to attack, letting out demonic howls. Master Mute frowned. He seemed to be hesitating. Guan Xiong watched from the side and hurriedly said, "Master, killing evil people is good. If they don't die, there will be endless troubles in the future." At this moment, everyone had the same thought. Sumo did not speak, but he gently opened the ancient mortal fan. The pendant on the ancient fan was already faintly shining. Red dust. The 2 ancient characters were faintly discernible. And at this moment, Sumo's palm was warm. He knew that if he took out the ancient mortal fan now, he would be able to fill the sky with red sand. He was not sure if he could deal with Li Yuanshu and Li Yuani, but that was a method that Sumo could still use. However, at this moment, everyone seemed to be waiting for the mute master to make his move, because he was the love monk. He had left behind too many legends in the southern domain of White Bones. Finally, the mute master nodded. Whoosh, whoosh, his gray monk robe, wide sleeves rolled up. The mute master put his palms together. His body slowly rose straight up. At first, there were wisps of cloud chi under his feet. Then, the cloud chi gradually turned into a lotus platform. Others might not understand what the lotus platform represented, but Guan Xiong's eyes instantly emitted a strange light. A lotus under his feet. The mute master was definitely not in the middle stage of the deity tribulation. The lotus was bathed in divine light. The mute master directly flew out of Sumo's white bones and skulls formation, calmly standing in the void. The power of the deity tribulation whistled in the void. But that tyrannical power disappeared without a trace when it was more than 10 feet away from the mute master. At that moment, no one could distinguish the aura of the mute master, because no one could see his realm. Looking again, the mute master separated his hands. The string of Buddhist beads was cast in the void, and between his hands, a white long sword slowly appeared. That sword unexpectedly did not have a sword hilt. It was like a stream of light. That reminded Sumo of Mu Jinghong's black sword. The 2 sword lights were somewhat similar. The mute warrior squinted his eyes at Li Yuanshu and Li Yuani. Killing evil people is a kind act. How could the mute man not understand this logic? At the same time, he looked down at the 3,000 white lotuses on the land of White Bones. 3,000 white lotuses, 3,000 lamplighting men. For the peace of this world, there would always be sacrifices. That was the true meaning of "if I don't enter hell, who will?" The 3,000 lamplighters were all gone. So what was his obsession? Therefore, the mute master finally smiled. He had figured it out. In this life, his fate with the white bone continent should end. Immediately after, the white longsword in his hand was aimed directly at Li Yuanshu and Li Yuanyi's fusion body. Zhang Xian willed. Whoosh! The white sword of light flew out directly. And at that moment, the Li brothers' combined body was completely frozen in the void, restraining a grand perfection deity tribulation. Li Yuanshu and Li Yuanyi's eyes were filled with endless fear. It was a feeling of terror that only they could feel. The other cultivators thought that they couldn't dodge it, but they knew that they couldn't move. That was a battle on a completely different level. The mute master had been showing mercy. Chi, boom! The white sword of light pierced through the void, directly piercing the forehead of the combined body. There was actually a bitter soul pagoda in that position. But the mute master's sword, even the pagoda, was destroyed together. An earth-shattering noise. It shook the entire world of white bones. Endless dust shot up to the sky. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Emptiness to emptiness, nothingness to nothingness. 10,000 years of admiring the world of mortals, a lifetime of white bones. Just as the white sword of light killed everything, the mute master finally spoke. The vow of silence was finally broken. Chapter 228. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, void to void, nothingness to nothingness. The mute master's words echoed throughout the southern bone region. At that moment, it wasn't Sanskrit, but it was better than Sanskrit. After a lifetime of silence, the mute master finally spoke. As soon as he opened his mouth, he killed a perfected deity tribulation cultivator. Black and white light swam in the air of the 1,000 desolation mountain. Wisps, wisps, pieces, blossoms, the remnants of the light were like broken leaves and flowers, like fragmented jade. Drifting, drifting. Nothing was left of Li Yuanshu and Li Yuanyi under the mute master's sword. The black and white figure and the pagoda were gone. Everything had turned into nothingness. There was only smoke and an indescribable aura in the air. Then, the morning sun rose and the east turned white. However, this morning, there was no drum of dusk, no ringing of the morning bell. The 1,000 desolation temple, or the immortal temple, disappeared from the bone continent forever. The 3,000 Buddha lotuses were enough to suppress everything. Amit Ba. At this moment, the mute master chanted the name of Buddha. However, an illusory projection appeared above his head. The projection wore a white robe and had Buddhist beads around his neck. His body emitted auspicious Buddhist light. Beneath his feet was a 9-layered lotus platform. He was warm and smiling, compassionate and affectionate. It was a monk of unparalleled beauty. Love monk. Hua. At that moment, the projection emitted endless light. The red sun just happened to erupt. That red sun served as his back. At that moment, it was like a real Buddha had descended. At that moment, the entire white bone continent saw that Buddha figure. The great figures of the bone region and the northern region all looked up. In the divine tribulation sect, Bai Lai narrowed his eyes. The image of the Buddha was reflected in his eyes at that moment. Love monk. Bai Lai smiled in his heart, but he didn't say anything. At this moment, countless people knelt in the southern bone region. Love monk, holy monk. In White Lotus Town, the children shouted, "Look, the love monk has arrived. Kneel." At that moment, everyone was worshiping him with great devotion. In the ruins of the 10,000 desolation mountain, many cultivators also knelt on the ground. It was because the passion monk was an exceptional expert, someone who was far beyond his reach. Even Guan Xiong and Linghu Huan were kneeling on the ground. Sumo was the same. She knelt on the 10,000 desolation mountain, her heart filled with sincerity. At this time, all of Sumo's skeletons and magical weapons have been put back into the storage pouch. All living beings are suffering. Buddha is merciful. Master Mute looked at the crowd and said slowly. At that moment, there was no sadness or joy in his eyes, only incomparable calm. His fate with white bones had come to an end. He was about to leave this place. Once he spoke, he would leave the white bones. Finally, the mute master's gaze fell on Sumo. Sumo, you definitely came to the immortal temple for a reason. What are you confused about? I am willing to answer your questions. Then, everything about the 5 wheels will be completed, the mute master said slowly. He seemed to know everything about Sumo. Ancestor, disciple truly does have some doubts. Sumo kowtowed deeply, and then she asked, "May I ask, Ancestor, is there reincarnation in the world?" Reincarnation? The mute master revealed a faint smile. If you are willing, then there will definitely be reincarnation. Then where is reincarnation? Where is reincarnation? When a mute master heard this question, a trace of grief flashed past his eyes. Sumo, the vast universe is boundless, and there are countless worlds. You ask me where reincarnation is, but I do not know either. It is because everyone's reincarnation is different. It could be in this world, or it could be in another world. It could be within a single step, or it could be millions of li away. Ancestor, then will I be able to meet her in reincarnation? Sumo didn't mention Mu Jinghong. It was because he knew that the mute master's ancestor definitely knew everything. The mute master looked at Sumo, shook his head, and then smiled. At that moment, the passion monk above his head also seemed to smile. In their eyes, Sumo was like an incomparably naive child. Sumo, the mute master called. Disciple is here. Sumo replied. Haven't you already met her in reincarnation? The mute master smiled. Huh? Sumo was slightly stunned. Met, it is just meeting. As long as fate has not ended, of course we will meet again. The mute master said, it is just that when and where, who will we meet again? No one dares to say. You figure out yourself. Reincarnation, there must be. You must believe. The mute master's voice was slightly heavy, but he gave Sumo a definite answer. Disciple thanks Ancestor for dispelling my doubts. At that moment, Sumo's eyes were filled with tears, because he was indeed the answer he hoped for. Sumo, what other doubts do you have? The mute master asked again. Disciple's heart has no doubts. Sumo replied. Hee. The mute master shook his head and smiled. Sumo, there is injustice in your heart, and it has been lingering for 100 years. How can you have no doubts? Sumo was stunned again. The mute master continued. Sumo, the wind wheel masters have found a home. They are not from the white bone mainland. Neither are Fengshi. They did not deliberately hide many things from you. But summer insects cannot talk about ice. Your realm is not high enough, so your words are useless, because you will not understand. In this sense, they have never lied to you. The mute master said slowly. Sumo's heart stirred, because that was indeed the crux in Sumo's heart. The experience of the 5 wheels was a pain in Sumo's heart. He really did not understand what they did. However, Sumo was not willing to admit it. Thank you, Ancestor. Sumo sighed. He was willing to believe the mute master's words. Then he thought of something and asked, May I ask, Ancestor, what does it mean to kill for all living beings and have no regrets in this life? To enjoy 100,000 years of peace, what crime have I committed? Sumo asked a sentence from the Holy Wheel Ancestor's behest. The mute master heard it and sighed. Sumo, you should understand that a strong man should cut his losses. If the Holy Wheel Ancestor did not bear the name of killing, the White Bone mainland would have been awakened. That was a condition of exchange. Killing the Slekton sect in exchange for 100,000 years of peace. Exchange with who? Sumo frowned. The chaotic gods mainland, the corpseless sect, the mute master said. The corpseless sect. Sumo had never heard of this name. At this moment, Guanxiong's expression changed slightly. The corpseless sect is the oldest immortal sect in the Pure Land. Their level of controlling and refining corpses is unimaginable. 70,000 years ago, they traveled to the White Bone mainland to awaken the bones, because the bones are prey in their eyes. To protect the bones and more living beings, the Holy Wheel Ancestor promised them to kill 20,000 disciples of the Slekton sect. The corpseless sect promised the Holy Wheel ancestor not to awaken the bones for 100,000 years. Oh, Sumo raised her eyebrows. The corpseless sect. Even Feng, she doesn't know about this. The mute master smiled bitterly. The Holy Will ancestor also told me to keep my mouth shut. However, I've broken the silent meditation, so it's okay to say it. Sumo finally knew the reason why the Holy Wheel ancestor betrayed the Holy Wheel ancestor. Why did the mute master practice the silent meditation? Sumo said. Hee hee. The mute master laughed. Because all words are illusory. Whether I say it or not, the Buddha's heart is there. A lifetime of silence is the most wonderful thing in 1,000 words. Sumo, you should remember that everything is actually a cultivation. Chapter 229. Everything was a form of cultivation. The mute master's words reverberated in Sumo's ears. When she looked again, the projection above the mute master's head had already started to dissipate. Then, the mute master put his palms together again. We are fated to meet. The mute master looked at Sumo and said slowly, Sumo, you have soul. So, don't delay your cultivation. This item will help you cross the sky ditch and travel to Pure Land. Then, the mute master waved his hand. A streak of white light flew over. It was a lotus petal that landed in Sumo's palm. That lotus petal can turn into a lotus boat, enough for you to cross the sky ditch, the mute master said again. Then, he looked at the white bone continent again. His gaze slowly moved from south to north. The gaze seemed to see through the entire white bone continent. In the direction of the God Tribulation sect, his gaze paused for a moment and then retracted. Amitabha, the mute master chanted one last time, and then his hand seal changed. Whoosh! Wind blew across the entire white bone southern region. In an instant, the fragrance of the lotus spread through the air. When they looked again, the mute master's figure quickly retreated, heading straight for the sky ditch 10,000 li away. He went further and further away, fading away. At the edge of the white bone continent, endless roars could be heard. There were thousands of vicious beasts and demons. However, the mute master's figure directly disappeared into the mist of the sky ditch. Everyone felt a sense of loss in their hearts. At this moment, the sun hung high in the sky. This was the first day after the immortal temple disappeared in the white bone southern region. The Thousand Desolation Mountain had been split in half from the middle. The entire Thousand Desolation Mountain had undergone a fundamental change. Now, this place could only be called the Thousand Desolation Ruins. Many cultivators of the White Bone Southern region first thanked Sumo, because without Sumo's formation, none of them would have survived. Then, they left one after another. Above the White Bone continent for millions of years, sects often changed. Life and cultivation had to continue. From then on, the White Bone Southern region entered the Thousand Desolation era. In the end, only Sumo, Guanxiong, Linghu Huan, and the other female cultivators of the Bliss Palace were left. Linghu Huan came over and thanked Sumo and Guanxiong. Thank you for helping me, Linghu Huan said with a smile. The white robe was still loose, revealing Linghu Huan's fragrant shoulders, causing one's imagination to run wild. At this moment, Linghu Huan had completely recovered the alluring demeanor of the palace lord of Bliss Palace. Sumo was fine. At this time, he was still immersed in the conversation with the mute master. However, Guanxiong could not shift his gaze away. The female cultivator from the Bliss Palace was the last to survive. Even the female cultivator who had been invaded by the devil and then possessed by the wandering North Soul had lost all of her devil intent, but she had yet to awaken. Palace Master Blissful, you're welcome, Sumo said plainly. The hero rescues the damsel in distress. Guanxiong's small eyes lit up. Among the 20 blissful female cultivators in front of him, which one of them wasn't a peerless beauty? Linghu Huan pursed his lips into a smile and looked at Guanxiong. Senior Divine Tribulation, if you're interested, why don't you come to my palace for a few days? I guarantee that you'll enjoy all the bliss in the world. Linghu Huan's innocence was accompanied by endless seduction. It was an indescribable feeling. Guan Xiong was a divine tribulation cultivator, but he could not help but feel smug at that moment. However, it was not the art of seduction, but an invincible charm. Cough, cough. Guan Xiong faked a cough and could not help but steal a glance at Sumo. However, Sumo's expression did not change at all. The female cultivators from the Bliss Palace seemed to be ordinary women in Sumo's eyes. Linghu Hehuan glanced at the female cultivators from the Bliss Palace. The female cultivators immediately understood what the palace lord meant. The female cultivators around the ox cart all knelt down and begged with a pleasant voice. "Senior Divine Tribulation, please come to my palace to enjoy bliss." 16 beauties as beautiful as flowers and jade invited him together. Guan Xiong's chubby face shone with endless radiance. All these years, he had been hiding his identity as a divine tribulation cultivator on the Bone mainland. Therefore, it was rare for Guan Xiong to be treated with such respect. After the battle, Guan Xiong felt even more relaxed. The black and white female cultivator immediately came over and supported Guan Xiong from both sides. She even purposely pressed her body against Guan Xiong's and said with a coquettish voice, "I am willing to serve you, senior." Only the green-clothed female cultivator who led the ox did not move. She looked at everything calmly. Her soft voice and fragrance assailed his nostrils. Guan Xiong's left and right arms were pressed against the soft jades, and he instantly enjoyed it. At that moment, the black and white bliss messengers no longer had the murderous aura they had the night before. They were clearly women made of water, and they were incredibly charming. At that moment, Guan Xiong almost forgot who he was. Guan Xiong looked at Sumo with a grin. "What do you think, Sumo? Shall we take a look at the Bliss Palace?" Sumo glanced at Guan Xiong and smirked. "Sure." Guan Xiong was initially worried that Sumo would not agree to it. However, he did not expect Sumo to agree so readily. This time, it was exactly what he wanted. Enjoying himself once might not mean anything. Guan Xiong's thoughts began to race. His hand naturally wrapped around the slender waist of the black and white messengers. Wherever his palm touched, there was a stretch of softness. The black and white messengers smiled charmingly, but they did not dodge at all. "Hey!" Guan Xiong was a little carried away. His eyes narrowed into slits. "Little Su, you're a good friend. Let's enjoy our blessings together." However, Sumo looked at Guan Xiong and shook her head. "Guan Xiong, do you know why I agreed to it?" "Why?" Guan Xiong was stunned. "Because I'm afraid that if I don't go, no one will collect your corpse." Sumo smirked. "Huh?" Sumo's cold water did not seem to extinguish the endless passion in Guan Xiong's heart. "Sumo, it's not necessary. We'll stay for a day or two, then leave." "No problem at all." At that moment, before Sumo could answer, a young girl's voice suddenly came from a void. "Why bother? Since you're going, why don't you just stay in the Bliss Palace? I think it's better. Enjoy yourself every day and sing every night. That's the life of a deity." Hee. Ugh. Guan Xiong was halfway through his laughter when his expression suddenly changed. "Go." Guan Xiong shook his shoulders and sent the black and white emissaries beside him flying. Ouch. The two black and white emissaries were using the art of seduction, and it was extremely effective. Guan Xiong felt like his bones were going soft. However, he did not expect the fatty to suddenly change his expression. The power of the deity's tribulation sent them flying. They were perfected, nascent soul cultivators, but before Guan Xiong, they were like mortals. They had no power to resist at all. They were sent flying just like that, and it was two at a time. Poor Guan Xiong. Linghu Hehuan's expression changed slightly as well. That was because she suddenly felt an extremely dangerous aura. A peerless powerhouse was nearby. Guan Xiong quickly tidied up his clothes and knelt on the ground in a panic. "Your servant greets the first mistress." Sumo was stunned as well. However, at that moment, a figure gradually materialized in midair. It was a woman in white, sitting on a purple lotus seat. The woman in white had an elegant face and a spirited gaze. However, her expression was frosty at the moment. Chapter 230. The white-robed girl sat on the lotus seat, exuding boundless might. It was not just the might of one's cultivation level, but another level of might. Guanxiong was a deity tribulation almighty, one of the few beings on the Whitebone mainland. At this moment, all the cultivators of the scene were shocked. Sumo had never seen the white-robed girl before, and she had never heard Guanxiong mention her. Who was this white-robed girl who appeared out of nowhere? Guanxiong, do you still remember me? The young mistress, the white-robed girl, spoke again. Guanxiong's face was drenched in sweat. He was truly afraid. Sumo had never seen Guanxiong so afraid. Just now, Guanxiong was extremely calm even when facing powerful enemies in the middle and late stages of the deity tribulation realm. However, in front of the white-clothed girl, Guanxiong's body trembled. In truth, Sumo did not know that part of Guanxiong's confidence came from the white-robed girl. Therefore, he was not afraid even when facing a perfected deity tribulation. There was nothing to be afraid of if there was always someone backing you up. Be it Sumo or Linghu Hehuan, none of them could tell the white-robed girl's realm. Even a perfected spirit transformation realm could not tell the other party's realm. Could she be at the undead realm? Sumo and Linghu Hehuan pondered. Young mistress, I was wrong. I was just joking. I wouldn't dare to cross the line. Guanxiong quickly cowed out. The young mistress rarely called him by his name. Little fatty, damned fatty. Those were the young mistress's catchphrases, making them seem intimate. However, the words Guanxiong sent a chill down his spine. It meant that the white-robed girl was truly enraged. Guanxiong, if I was a moment later, you would have been in the Bliss Palace's gentle home. The white-robed girl's expression did not improve at all. Do you remember what I told you that day? The white-robed girl said angrily. Guanxiong broke out in cold sweat, looking awkward. You don't remember? The white-robed girl became even more furious. I remember. Guanxiong quickly said. Speak. Guanxiong's expression became even more awkward. Are you going to speak or not? The white-robed young lady angrily shouted from atop the lotus platform. I say. Guanxiong lowered his head even more. He hesitated for a moment before saying, if I have sex with a woman in the Bone Continent. Miss, cut off my little bird and feed it to your bird. After saying that, Guanxiong did not dare to raise his head again. Puffed. Most of the female cultivators from the Bliss Palace were amused. The black and white envoys were laughing so hard that they were shaking. Linghu Hehuan could not help but smile as well. Sumo laughed heartily. Little Susie, what are you laughing at? Guanxiong angrily rebuked Sumo with a flushed face. He didn't dare to look at the white-clothed girl, but he dared to talk back to Sumo. Damn fatty. I'm laughing because my black feathered deity Hong has food to eat. Sumo deliberately angered him. Actually, when Sumo heard the white-clothed girl's question, she clearly wanted to embarrass Guanxiong. Looking at the white-clothed girl's expression, he knew that the thunder was loud but the rain was small. If the white-clothed girl really wanted to do something to Xiong, she would have already done so. Now he was just scaring Guanxiong. The white-clothed girl sneered. Guanxiong, it's good that you remember. Meow Longer, will definitely keep my word. Let's go. Guanxiong was stunned. He raised his head and asked, Eldest Miss, where are we going? Back to the chaotic gods continent, of course. Cut up the bird and feed it to the bird. The white-clothed girl snorted coldly. Then, she flicked her hand and shot out a purple light. That purple light was extremely special. Both Sumo and Linghu Hehuan felt their souls tremble. Sumo even felt that the purple light was more powerful than Nine Nether's divine dragon binding rope. At that moment, the two of them could not help but look at each other. That power was too terrifying. Chi. The purple light trapped Guanxiong, while the other end was in the hands of the white-clothed girl. Guanxiong didn't dare to resist at all. Of course, he knew that he didn't have the ability to resist. The white-clothed girl didn't say a word. She didn't even look at Sumo and Linghu Hehuan. Instead, she grabbed Guanxiong's hand and headed straight for the Bone Heaven Trench. Was he really going back to the chaotic gods continent? Guanxiong was dumbfounded. What he didn't know was that the white-clothed girl Miao Long, was here on her master's orders. The Bone Continent no longer needed him as a patrol envoy. However, Guan Xiong really thought that the young lady was angry and wanted to cut up the bird and feed it to the bird. "Sumo, save me! Sumo, save me!" Guan Xiong cried and wailed. Tears and snot streamed down his face. In fact, if he couldn't do it himself, how could Sumo save him? He was crying for the white-clothed girl to see. At the last moment, Guan Xiong spat out a white light from his mouth. The white light was a special jade scroll. "Sumo, this is for you. For the sake of our 100 years together, you must come to the chaotic god's continent and save me." The white-clothed girl didn't care about Guan Xiong. In fact, she saw the jade scroll that Guan Xiong spat out, but she didn't care at all. The purple lotus flew up. She was holding the poor Guan Xiong's hand. It was like holding a ball. Then, the white-clothed girl and Guan Xiong disappeared into the depths of the trench. Guan Xiong's wailing could no longer be heard. However, they disappeared in a different direction than the mute master. They should have gone in 2 different directions. Guan Xiong also left. Sumo smiled bitterly. In the past 100 years, Guan Xiong would always disappear for a few days. However, this time was different. Sumo understood that she probably wouldn't be able to see Guan Xiong for a while. Sumo felt a little disappointed. Who was that white-clothed girl? Miao Long Air. Sumo remembered the white-clothed girl's name. Brother Su. Linghu Huan cupped his fist at Sumo and smiled. "Just now, we invited you with great hospitality. We implicated Senior Guan. Please don't blame us, Brother Su." Linghu Huan bowed politely. The rest of the Bliss Palace disciples also bowed. However, at this moment, every single one of the female cultivators was extremely solemn, and there was no sign of flirtatiousness. "Brother Linghu, you're too serious," Sumo also said politely. "Who was that white-clothed girl?" Linghu Huan asked. "Hee." Sumo smiled and shook her head. She did not say anything. Since Sumo did not say anything, Linghu Huan did not ask further. "Brother Su, I'll be taking my leave too." Linghu Huan looked at Sumo with a strange glint in her eyes. At that moment, Sumo's heart skipped a beat. That was because Sumo felt as if someone had peeped into her heart. At that moment, Linghu Huan smiled. One had to admit that the palace master of Bliss Palace was an exquisite woman. Her smile and frown were both beautiful. "Brother Su, we're fated. I'll give you something as repayment for your help today." As he spoke, Linghu Huan raised a hand. A black token landed in Sumo's hand. The ancient words 9 nether were engraved on it. Sumo was stunned. "Brother Su, this is a 9 nether token. With this token, you can enter 9 nether city in the future. If you're in trouble, you can shatter this token. As long as you're in the pure world, someone will definitely save you. However, you can only use it once." Linghu Huan said. Then, before Sumo could say anything, "Farewell." Linghu Huan's figure moved and flew into the ox carriage. The green-clothed girl looked at Sumo deeply before leading the ox back into the carriage. The 5-color divine ox's hooves generated clouds. The other female cultivators rode the wind. Linghu Huan's laughter came from the carriage. "Brother Su, I hope you find that Mu girl." Actually, my surname is Mu too. The Bliss Palace is definitely not a filthy place. However, the public's words can melt gold. Sumo was stunned. Chapter 231. There was a small town at the edge of the Bone mainland. Its name was Nameless. Nameless Town was exactly 3,000 miles away from the Bone Gully. It was said that this was the town closest to the gully on the Bone mainland. The town did not have a name, so it could only be called Nameless. It was dilapidated and barren, with only a few dozen households. Moreover, most of the residents were old, weak, sick, or disabled because those who could leave had already left. However, even so, it still had a small square. There was a lotus flower blooming on the square. That lotus flower gave the entire town a sense of vitality and Buddha's will. At this moment, Sumo, dressed in green, stood beside the lotus flower in silence. However, he felt that there was something special about that lotus flower. because compared to the lotus flower in White Lotus Town, it seemed to have a stamen. That's right. That lotus flower only had petals but no stamen. However, it still emitted a fragrance and brilliance. Sumo was puzzled. This was already the 7th day since the destruction of the Wanhuang Temple. Everything in the southern region of the Bone Mainland was returning to peace. Sumo was also preparing to leave the Bone Mainland. However, he had been heading south since the Wanhuang Mountain. This nameless town was already the 17th town he had passed. One town, one lotus. Sumo had to stand beside each lotus flower for a while. That was because he remembered the ancient painting in Mu Jinghong's cave abode. The beautiful man had once said that he crossed the sea by stepping on lotuses. Many things about lotuses were appearing in Sumo's world. Over the past few days, Sumo had been regretting it. That was because he had forgotten to ask the mute master what he had said for the first time. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, nothingness to nothingness, nothingness to nothingness. 10,000 years of admiring the mortal world, a lifetime of white bones. What did those words mean? That was because those words had also appeared in Mu Jinghong's ancient painting. Unfortunately, when a mute master explained to Sumo, Sumo had forgotten to ask. However, there were many things that did not need to be asked. For example, time would give the answer to the Holy Will Patriarch. Sumo believed that everything would have an answer. Sumo headed south in order to leave the Bone Continent. The last jade slip Guanxiong gave him was actually a map. It was a map of another continent. The other continent was called the Chaos God Continent. The Chaotic Gods Continent was the place Sumo wanted to explore. Crossing the Heaven Trench would lead them to the Chaotic Gods Continent. During these 7 days, Sumo only wanted to look at the white bones again and digest everything that happened in Immortal Temple. That was why she was practically walking. After looking at the strange lotus, Sumo walked towards a door in the town. It was a tavern. In fact, Sumo was also a little curious. How could there be a tavern in such a barren town? The tavern was not big, only 2 square feet. Inside, there were only 2 old tables. One of the tables even had a leg made of stones. However, the tavern was spotless. The entire tavern was filled with the fragrance of wine. There was a back room in the tavern, but no one else was there. Waiter, serve the wine. Sumo sat down at the table with the missing leg and called out, "Cough, cough." At this time, the curtains of the back room were lifted and an old woman walked out. The old woman wore a cloth dress and had a head full of white hair. She carried an ancient jar and coughed softly. Young man, a rare guest, a rare guest." The old woman glanced at Sumo. A glimmer of light flashed through her originally dim yellow eyes. Someone finally came to this tavern. Oh! Sumo also glanced at the old woman and couldn't help but smile faintly. "Granny, does this place only have a guest after a long time? This is my first time here." Hee hee. The old woman cracked a smile. She was actually missing 2 front teeth. There is no one else in the town, so everyone who comes is a rare and honored guest. No matter how many times you come, this old woman will treat you well. Saying this, the old woman placed the ancient jar on the table. Without waiting for Sumo to order, she turned around and brought 2 side dishes. "This place is poor, so there is no need to order. Just these 2 dishes." Hee hee. The old woman's face was full of wrinkles. Of the 2 side dishes, one was white and similar to lotus root. The other was black, which Sumo didn't know. However, the color of the 2 dishes was good and very fresh. The old woman sat down and then opened the clay seal of the wine jar. In an instant, the wine fragrance spread in all directions, refreshing the mind. At that moment, Sumo's eyes flashed with a hint of excitement. Just the wine fragrance alone was already intoxicating. How could there be such good wine in this dilapidated town? The corner of Sumo's mouth couldn't help but curve. The old woman took 2 big bowls. Then, she filled both bowls, handed one bowl to Sumo, and took the other one for herself. "Young man, there is no one in the town. My tavern won't be able to stay open for much longer. It's fate that you're here today. This old woman will accompany you to drink this jar of old wine. I won't charge you for the wine. How about it?" Hee hee. Sumo nodded with a smile. Good. However, Sumo felt that this was a very strange town, and the old woman in front of her was also a very strange old woman. Hee hee. The old woman raised the wine cup. Clang. Sumo also raised the wine cup. The old and the young touched each other lightly. Then, they raised their heads and drank to their heart's content. The old woman's drinking was actually not the slightest bit inferior to Sumo's. The wine fragrance was intoxicating. Sumo felt that any kind of wine she had ever drunk could not compare to this bowl. What kind of wine was that? Sumo's heart shook. After walking the bones for 100 years, Sumo had also drunk a lot of wine. However, this bowl of wine was definitely different. It was not ordinary wine at all. However, the old woman in front of her was immortal. Old woman, what kind of wine is this? Sumo asked. What kind of wine? The old woman sighed and then shook her head. I don't remember. It's been too long. There used to be a name, but I really forgot it. Oh, Sumo asked again. Old woman, how old are you? It's the same. It's been too long. I don't remember. The old woman filled Sumo's and her wine cup again. The old woman's words sounded like a perfunctory reply. However, Sumo could feel a trace of disappointment in the old woman's voice. It was not a perfunctory reply, but the truest expression. The old woman was not immortal. Sumo's eyes focused. There was a kind of eye technique in Seven Senior Sisters' Inheritance. It could see the true appearance of a human demon. Even if one changed their appearance, they could still see through it. Moreover, as one's cultivation increased, the eye technique will become more powerful. However, in Sumo's eyes, the old woman with white hair was still reflected. He could not see anything at all. Young man, let's have another bowl. Clang. The two of them clinked their bowls again, but Sumo only drank half of it, because he felt that his Dan-si had instantly turned into a huge wave. The bowl just now had actually completely turned into a stream of air. It was like a wave of immortal chi that went straight to his limbs and bones. That bowl of wine filled Sumo's Dan-si to the brim. It should be known that Sumo had reached the great perfection of the soul transformation realm, but he had not broken through in 100 years. Although it was too normal for a soul transformation realm cultivator to not break through in 100 years, Sumo was not an ordinary person. At that moment, his Dan-si surged. Breaking through to the deity tribulation? Sumo's heart shook. The old woman's expression did not change as she drank the wine in one gulp. Chapter 232. The Nameless Town, the Nameless Immortal Wine. Sumo had not finished his 2 bowls of wine, but his Dan-si was already churning. The spiritual energy contained in the wine could actually help Sumo ascend to the deity tribulation stage. Hi. The old granny had finished her 2nd bowl. She wiped her mouth with her sleeve, looking very refreshed. What's wrong? Young man, you can't drink anymore. The old granny said with a smile. Hee hee. Sumo secretly used the unwithering art and directed all the spiritual energy into his Dan-si. At the same time, the skeleton immortal root in his Dan-si shone brightly. The 9-dragon deity platform also shone slightly. All of this helped Sumo stabilize his Dan-si. This wine must not be wasted. Sumo tilted his head back and drank the rest of the wine. Whoosh, his Dan-si surged again. But this time, Sumo was prepared. Once again, he guided spiritual energy into his body. His unwithering art had already begun to circulate. Granny good wine, Sumo praised. Seeing Sumo drink 2 bowls of wine, the old granny could not help but nod. Young man, the wine in this small tavern is very strong. It's really good that you can drink 2 bowls in a row. The old granny said with a smile. Come, eat a few mouthfuls to suppress the wine. With that, the old granny ate 2 mouthfuls, and Sumo also took 2 dishes. The white dishes were fragrant and sweet, as if they were made of glutinous rice, but more chewy. The black dishes were slightly spicy, but more chewy, like meat tendons. Sumo tasted 2 mouthfuls. The taste was not bad, but she did not know whether it was meat or vegetable. Just 2 mouthfuls of the dishes had indeed calmed the waves in Sumo's Dan-si a little. How is it? The old granny said. This is all made by me. Nowadays, there are not many people who can taste this old granny's cooking. Very good, Sumo said. Junior, thank you for your hospitality, Granny. Hee hee. The old granny laughed, then poured more wine for Sumo and herself. Young man, you're really straightforward. This barren town is incomparably desolate. Aren't you afraid that my wine and dishes are poisoned? Sumo was slightly taken aback, and then she couldn't help but smile. Granny bestowing wine and dishes is this Junior's blessing. Even if it's poisonous, this Junior will still drink a few bowls and eat a few mouthfuls. Ha ha ha. The old granny laughed happily. At the same time, a hint of disappointment flashed across her eyes. How many years had it been since anyone had entered her tavern? How many years had it been since anyone had drunk her immortal wine? Young man, you really know how to talk. The old lady was pleased. Hee hee. The wine was immortal wine, and the dishes were dragon tendons and dragon meat. This meal is Granny's farewell for you. Being able to enter my tavern is a great fortune. Although the old lady didn't say anything, it was obvious that she wasn't an ordinary person. Thank you, Granny, Sumo said hurriedly. Sumo didn't ask any more questions, because he could sense that this granny before him definitely had a story of her own. There was wine and stories. Sumo's trip was definitely worthwhile. No one has come to this town for tens of thousands of years. The old lady said, You're the first guest in tens of thousands of years. As for how many tens of thousands of years, I really don't remember. Oh, Sumo nodded. Granny, it must be tough for you to be alone. Tough? Hee hee. The old lady nodded with a bitter smile, then shook her head. At that moment, even she didn't know if it was tough or not. Come, drink another sip with Granny. Just a small sip will do. You won't be able to handle this wine. The two of them drank a mouthful each. The old lady looked at Sumo and asked, Young man, you came from North Town. If you go south, it'll be desolate. You're going to leave the Bone Continent, right? You're going to Sky Ravine, right? Granny, that's right. At this moment, Sumo didn't need to hide anything from this old lady, because her intuition told her that this granny was definitely an almighty. Moreover, she was a hidden expert that was absolutely unfathomable. Therefore, being honest was the best way to deal with it. If the old lady wanted to harm Sumo, she wouldn't need to waste any effort. You're called Sumo, the granny said. Oh, Sumo was surprised that the granny knew her name. Granny, you know me? The granny laughed. I didn't know you at first. However, 7 days ago, you were on the 1,000 Desolation Mountain. That love monk used 3,000 lotuses to suppress demons. So I took a casual glance and eavesdropped on them. That's why I know your name is Sumo. Sumo couldn't help but take a deep breath in her heart. He casually glanced around and listened to their conversation. Just what kind of person was this old granny? Could there be such an expert on the Bone Continent? Above the divine tribulation? Didn't Guan Xiong say that there were no undying realm experts on the Bone Continent? The old lady saw Sumo's confusion and said with a smile, I'm not a bone man. I'm going to leave, because the person I'm waiting for won't come looking for me. He's gone. Sigh. The old lady seemed lost as she finished her bowl of wine alone. Granny, please forgive me for my poor eyesight. Sumo stood up and bowed respectfully to the granny. What expert? I'm just a bitter person. The granny motioned for Sumo to sit down. Sumo sat down. Originally, I was planning to drink this jar of wine alone at sunset today and then leave. I didn't expect you to come here. It must be fate. So, Granny wants to chat with you. All right, Sumo replied with a smile. Then, he filled the granny's bowl. Sumo, where are you going after leaving the Bone Continent? The granny asked. The Chaotic Gods Continent. Sumo said. The Chaotic Gods Continent? The granny laughed. The Chaotic Gods Continent is indeed an interesting place. That continent is really chaotic. However, the Chaotic Gods Continent is a good place to train. It's much better than the Bone Continent. The granny muttered to herself. You're going to the Chaotic Gods Continent to look for someone, right? The granny said with a faint smile. Huh? Sumo was stunned. In fact, he didn't know where to go to the Chaotic Gods Continent. Now, it didn't matter where Sumo went. Fortunately, Guan Xiong had given him a map, so he went there. Moreover, didn't Guan Xiong ask Sumo to save him? Looking for someone seemed to be the right thing to do. However, Sumo sensed something else from the granny's expression. Hee hee. The granny looked at Sumo in surprise. Then, she smiled lovingly. Sumo, aren't you the love monk? Is there a reincarnation cycle? Will you meet him? Sumo finally understood what the granny meant. Sumo, it's the right thing to look for him. The granny nodded. It's better to look for him than to wait. I've been waiting here for tens of thousands of years. 7 days ago, I caught a glimpse of him from afar. As it turns out, we're only 10,000 miles apart. But he's gone again. I won't wait for him, because he's never thought of looking for me. The granny was on the verge of tears. Granny. Sumo didn't quite understand the granny's words. She wanted to comfort her, but didn't know what to say. The granny controlled her emotions. Sumo, do you know who I am? Of course, Sumo shook her head. Chapter 233. Sumo, I'm a vixen. After saying that, the old granny actually laughed hysterically, but there was too much sadness in her laughter. Vixen? Sumo was stunned at first, but she suddenly remembered the play that the children in White Lotus Town put on. In that play, there was a vixen. However, Sumo didn't know if that play was real or fake, or if it was the truth. At the same time, she thought about what the old granny said just now, and saw the person from afar 7 days ago. They were only 10,000 miles apart, but the person she was waiting for left. Sumo instantly understood. Granny, could it be that the person you were waiting for is the mute master? Sumo asked. The granny smiled bitterly and nodded. That's right. In this life, he practiced silent meditation, and is indeed called mute master. I waited for him for 10,000 years on the White Bone Land. It's a pity the granny didn't say anything else, and only sighed. Sumo understood that the granny meant that the mute master didn't come to find her. Sumo, you should have heard of the various legends about the love monk on the White Bone Land, right? The granny asked. I've heard a little. Sumo smiled. Is it because children don't want to play the vixen during games? The granny laughed self-mockingly. Sumo shook her head and smiled bitterly, but didn't reply. It seemed like a similar scene had happened in the nameless town as well. The truth. The truth? The truth. The granny said 3 truths in a row, but the tone of each one was different. There was mockery, doubt, and helplessness. Granny, what is the truth? Sumo couldn't help but ask. The truth. The granny looked at Sumo and smiled faintly. Then, she raised the bowl of wine and signaled Sumo to drink with her. The two of them drank from each other's mouths. Sumo didn't dare to drink too much, but the bowl of wine was gone again. Then the granny sighed. Sumo, you're still young. Let me tell you, the world changes and the affairs of the world are complicated. There are many things that you can't see clearly. Even if it's the same thing, if you look at it from different perspectives, the truth may be different. Do you understand? Sumo listened to his mother-in-law's words and nodded slightly. The granny was right. There might not be only one truth. The granny smiled. So, Sumo, the so-called truth in the world is what you believe. As long as you believe, it's the truth. Hearing the granny's words, Sumo was stunned. Boom! In an instant, something seemed to explode in Sumo's mind. Like a bright light, it fiercely blasted open the endless darkness. The mute man had once said that Sumo had doubts in his heart. This was because Sumo didn't understand the actions of Windmill's senior brothers and sisters. He didn't understand Mu Jinghong's choice either. He also questioned why Bai Lai hid so many things from him. Even Guan Xiong, even though they had known each other for 100 years, Sumo was still unwilling to tell him many things. Because Sumo always had a grudge. Because Sumo always wondered if what he saw was the truth. This mentality even affected the progress of his cultivation. 7 days ago, Master Mute said, "Summer insects cannot talk about ice." This made Sumo realize his shortcomings. However, it was not enough to resolve the knot in his heart. Otherwise, Sumo wouldn't have to walk for another 7 days in the southern region of White Bones. He still couldn't understand everything about White Bones. The so-called truth was what you believed in your heart. The granny's words enlightened Sumo. Regardless of whether he lied or not, or whether he hid or not, could it be that the senior brothers and senior sisters of Windmill did not treat him well? Did Xiong, and Xiong not love him? Did Xiong, by lie, and Guanxiong not care about him? They never did. On the contrary, without those people, Sumo wouldn't be where he was today. The price that Mu Jinghong and the Windwheel children paid was their lives. Previously, Sumo just couldn't understand why they hid it from him and lied to him. Why didn't they let him choose? Sumo just wanted to know the truth. Therefore, everything about Five Wheels became a pain in Sumo's heart. If he could, he didn't want to lose his cultivation. However, the granny's words made Sumo feel enlightened. That's right. What is the truth? The one you believe in is the truth. In fact, Sumo always believed that Windwheel children, Mu Jinghong by lie, and Guanxiong did it for him. They never wanted to hurt him. Windwheel is my home. I will wait for you in Samsara. When Sumo scolded by lie, he pretended to be crazy and didn't say anything. Although Guanxiong didn't tell Sumo many things in the past 100 years, he always accompanied him. Wasn't all this enough? Of course it was. Sumo had an answer in his heart. Whoosh, whoosh, Sumo's pill sea was once again rocked by great waves. The skeleton immortal root vibrated on the Nine Dragons' immortal platform. Sumo used the everlasting art to guide and calm it down again. But Sumo knew that he was very, very close to the deity tribulation. He just had to wait for his final breakthrough. The granny smiled at Sumo. Good boy, you're really worth teaching. So quickly, you've understood the truth that Granny took tens of thousands of years to understand. But don't worry, it's just a deity tribulation, a small matter. How can I not give you a chance when you meet me? You should know that the heaven chasm can't be crossed unless it's a deity tribulation. The granny seemed to know the situation in Sumo's body clearly. Although the love monk gave you a lotus petal, it's not foolproof. He planted 3,000 lotuses, but he only gave you one petal. How stingy. As she spoke, the granny opened one hand. There was a lotus stamen in her palm. 3,000 Buddha lotuses suppress demons, but only one has no stamen. Because I killed the lamplighter of this town. That lotus stamen is in my hand. That night, I was the one who lit up the Buddha lamp with a light touch. He. The granny laughed hysterically again. Sumo finally understood why the lotus in this town had no heart. But why did you do that, Granny? Sumo asked. The granny laughed bitterly. The 3,000 Buddha lotuses were actually in the eyes of the love monk. I hoped to break one lotus heart, and he might come and find me. Unfortunately, another pity, Sumo understood that the mute master did not come. So I'll refine this lotus stamen and give it to you. The granny smiled. Then, a purple flame ignited in her palm. The stamen of the lotus was instantly refined into a lotus platform in her hand. But the lotus petals on the platform were only illusions. Sumo, the heaven trench is extremely dangerous. With this lotus platform, you can use the lotus petals that the love monk gave you as a sail. It's absolutely safe. You can reach the chaotic god's continent in no time. The granny placed the lotus platform in Sumo's hand. At the same time, it's also a defensive artifact. Thank you, Granny. Sumo took the lotus platform. This was what he needed. Come, let's drink another bowl. The granny filled a bowl of wine for both Sumo and herself. Cheers. The granny laughed. This time, she did not say it was just a small sip. Sumo obeyed and drank the bowl straight down his throat. In an instant, he felt the world spinning. Ha ha! The granny's happy laughter sounded in Sumo's ears. Sumo, tomorrow is your god's tribulation. Take care. I'm leaving. A fox's cry pierced the sky. In the end, Sumo seemed to see a snow-white fox flying directly into the void. Chapter 234. That night, Sumo dreamt of the rolling waves of the sea, the ebb and flow of the tides. That night, Sumo dreamt of lotus petals dancing in the air, flowers coming and going. Endless fragrance of wine accompanied by the fragrance of flowers. Endless fragrance of flowers accompanied by the waves of the sea. Sumo felt himself floating on the boundless sea, surrounded by fragrance. He saw that the skeleton on his 9-dragon immortal platform was already covered in a faint azure glow. At that moment, the skeleton no longer looked like a skeleton, but a person, because the azure glow filled the entire skeleton. But that person's features were unclear. The immortal root changed, the realm increased. But at that moment, Sumo was not clear-headed. He only felt as if he had entered a different world. Everything he felt and knew was different. At that moment, it was as if he had ascended from the human world to the immortal world. That feeling was indescribably wonderful. Divine Tribulation Realm? Sumo felt as if he was floating. But suddenly, the pale sea in his dream surged with great waves. In the air, the first bolt of lightning struck down. Boom! Crack! That bolt illuminated the entire pale sea. At the same time, its power seemed to want to split the pale sea in half. Whoosh! As the lightning fell, great waves swept up the sky, at least 100 jong high. Boom! Crack! Boom! Thunder rumbled incessantly. In the air above the pale sea, several bolts of lightning flashed. In the pale sea, great waves surged, each higher than the last. But now, the white bone immortal root was unmoving. Boom! At that moment, a bolt of lightning struck the top of the skeleton's head. But the skeleton was as steady as before. In fact, the azure glow on its body was even brighter, resisting the lightning tribulation. At that moment, Sumo understood something. Boom! Crack! Boom! 1 bolt, 2 bolts, 3 bolts, a total of 19 bolts of lightning, each stronger than the last. But each time, it could do nothing to the white skeleton. The white skeleton did not budge in the slightest. In fact, its movements did not change at all. It sat cross-legged, as steady as Mount Tai. If other divine tribulation cultivators saw this scene in Sumo's dream, they would most likely be shocked, because it was too domineering. It was not the lightning tribulation that was domineering, but the skeleton immortal root. Divine tribulation, divine tribulation. Only with tribulation could one successfully ascend. Whether it was Feng Shi or Guan Xiong, both of them had experienced tribulations and broken through them. Deity tribulation was obviously a level higher than soul transformation. The most important reason was that their immortal roots had to be tempered by the pale sea god lightning. Those who could withstand the elixir sea divine lightning usually had a slim chance of survival before finally cultivating the divine tribulation great Tao. Those who couldn't withstand the elixir sea divine lightning naturally couldn't advance. Moreover, there was only one chance to undergo the divine tribulation. Many soul transformation realm experts had prepared for hundreds or even thousands of years to ascend to the deity tribulation. However, even then, there was no guarantee that nothing would go wrong. Between the infinite worlds, countless mighty figures had died on the path of ascending to the deity tribulation. However, Sumo settled everything in her sleep with just a few bowls of wine. Sumo didn't even feel any pain. In his dreams, he was like an outsider. He watched it all happen, amazed at how it all happened. At that moment, Sumo really thought it was a dream. However, that dream lasted for an unknown period of time. Sumo's soul drifted. In the blink of an eye, in his dream, he only saw the color of the elixir sea gradually turn golden. The golden waves were like layers of wheat waves. Then, after an unknown period of time, on an early morning, it was drizzling and the autumn was slightly cool. Sumo slowly woke up on the table in the small tavern. It turned out that he had been bent over the table the entire time. That was really a good dream, a good sleep. Sumo frowned and composed himself. Then, he looked around him. He didn't know how long he had slept, but he saw that there was a thick layer of dust on the table where he was bent over. Sumo was stunned. Could it be that this nap of his actually took years to count? The wine jar on the table was already empty. The 2 plates of dragon meat and dragon tendons were also dried up, almost unrecognizable. How long did I sleep? Sumo muttered to himself. Then, Sumo stood up and walked out of the small tavern. As soon as he walked out of the small tavern, Sumo was instantly stunned, because there was no small town outside the small tavern. It was clearly a piece of barren land. Huh. However, Sumo looked carefully again and vaguely seemed to see the shadow of the small town in the past. However, this small town had long been barren, or it should be said that it had become an almost unrecognizable ruin. All the houses had collapsed. Endless weeds spread throughout the entire village. There was absolutely no sign of human habitation here. Sumo couldn't help but look in the direction of the small square. That place seemed to have experienced a great calamity and had long been unrecognizable. If Sumo didn't still remember the location of the small square, he wouldn't dare to believe that it used to be a square. And the lotus on the square was no longer there. That hollow lotus, in fact, had completely withered not long after the grandmother left, because it had no stamen at all. And in this small town, after the grandmother left, all the townspeople either left or died. Sumo looked at everything in a daze, and then looked back at the small tavern behind him. Wow, boom! And at the moment when he looked back, the originally dilapidated tavern also collapsed with a loud bang, bringing with it clouds of dust and smoke. Hee. Sumo couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that the small tavern had been waiting for him to wake up, or else it would have been long gone. Then he looked at the small tavern again and saw a few lines of extremely elegant handwriting in the smoke and dust. Destined to be with you, a dream of 1,000 years. Help you in your divine tribulation. See you again. Those lines didn't have a signature, but Sumo knew that it must have been left by the white-haired grandmother. Fox spirit? Hee. Thinking of the heaven fox that he saw when he was unconscious, Sumo couldn't help but ask himself, was that grandmother really a heaven fox? Of course, Sumo had heard of the legend of a heaven fox becoming an immortal, but there shouldn't be a demon clan in the White Bone Land. The Fox clan was the top existence in the demon clan. Divine tribulation. At this moment, Sumo really realized the changes in his Dan Sea. The golden waves sparkled under the sunlight. A skeleton made of green light. To be precise, it was not a skeleton, but a man made of green light, coiled on the Nine Dragons deity platform. A power more vast than the power of the soul, dissolving power, filled Sumo's entire body. Divine tribulation. Sumo took a deep breath. Everything came so easily for him. From a child cultivator to a divine tribulation. There was almost no obstruction. Sumo, what virtue or ability did he have to deserve such favor? Sumo's gaze became even more distant. Had it been more than 1,000 years? Sumo smiled bitterly and shook his head. But now, Sumo's mentality was different. What that fox grandmother gave Sumo was not only a divine tribulation, but also an epiphany. Sumo felt more free and at ease, and there was less of fetter. Everything about the White Bone Land was over. Sumo's heart was filled with a strange expectation for reincarnation. So without much hesitation, Sumo moved and went straight to the gutter in the south. Chapter 235. The Chaotic Gods continent was located in the northernmost part of the Pure Land. From a bird's-eye view, the Chaos God continent was also a ring-shaped third of the continent's surface. However, it was definitely not a human lying on its side. It was a normal continent. In fact, there were only 3 complete continents in the periphery of the Pure Land world. White Bones, Chaotic God, Ancient Shoe. The 3 continents each occupied about 1/3 of the Pure Land's periphery. There was an endless chasm between them. There were many floating continents of different sizes in the ravine. Some had cultivators on them, and some didn't have any life at all. Those floating continents weren't the main body of the Pure Land, but more like fragments of a continent. If the White Bone, the Chaotic God, and the Ancient Shoe were connected, they would form a ring. Within the ring, there was also a sky dish. Further in the heaven trench was the bitter Samsara Sea. In the middle of the bitter Samsara Sea, there was an existence that was like a sea, but not a sea, like a land, but not a land. That was the center of the Pure Land. There was Tian Fu above and 9 nether below. Tian Fu and the 9 underworld were both in the center of the Pure Land. It was the most mystical place in the Pure Land. However, Many cultivators of the Pure Land couldn't reach it even after spending their entire lives. The chaotic gods continent was also known as the nomadic continent or the spring and autumn continent. That was because it was the most chaotic continent in the entire Pure Land. Sects stood in great numbers, and extraordinary people appeared frequently. The chaotic gods continent was a fertile land for adventuring cultivators. After all, anything could happen on the chaotic gods continent. This was the place where miracles and deaths were most likely to occur in the Pure Land. At the edge of the chaotic gods continent was an ancient city called the Forgotten City. This was the city closest to the northern gutter on the Chaos Gods continent. It was only 700 miles away from the Heaven Trench. At this distance, not even a blade of grass would grow on the White Bone continent. However, there was a city on the Chaotic Gods continent. Legend has it that this place used to be a natural ravine crossing. The north crossing of the Chaos Gods continent faced the Heaven Trench and the Bone continent. However, in the eyes of the people from the Chaotic Gods continent, the Bone continent was considered a low-level continent. Therefore, this crossing was not very lively. Occasionally, there were cultivators who came to hunt or search for treasures in the Sky Ditch. However, Forgotten City was still an important city in the north of the Chaotic Gods continent. The reason for that was because there were 3 enormous teleportation formations in the city. They could transport cultivators directly to the central region of the Chaos Gods continent, or to other places along the way. It was almost midnight. However, the Forgotten Capital City was bustling with noise and excitement. This was a city that never slept all year round. As long as you wanted it, it could be said to have everything inside. There was an inn in Wangdu City called the Gathering Gold Inn. That was the biggest inn in the Forgotten City, because it was not only an inn, it was also a casino. There were all kinds of gambling tools and methods in the casino. In this gold gathering inn, as long as you wanted to bet, you could bet on anything. The entire first floor of the inn was the casino. At this time, there was a man in green clothes walking slowly in the middle of the casino. He held the gold gathering inn's unique chips in his hand, but they were not many. However, he would occasionally place a few bets, and the amount of bets he placed was not large. However, the only strange thing was that he seemed to have never lost. No matter what kind of bet it was, he was the one who won. In the beginning, the azure-robed man did not attract much attention. However, on the second floor of the Forgotten Capital Inn, there were 2 people in charge of the casino who gradually noticed the azure-robed man. Of the 2 people in charge, one was in a red robe, the other in a green robe. They both looked like middle-aged men. A tea table was placed in front of the 2 people. The 2 of them were sipping tea. At the same time, they were observing the casino on the first floor. They were 2 cultivators at the peak of the nascent soul realm. Mid-stage of the nascent soul realm. They only bet 3 chips each time, but they never lose. At this time, the man in the green robe looked at the azure-robed cultivator and said, "That azure-robed cultivator seems a little interesting. Oh, he's probably just lucky and good at scheming." The man in the red robe did not think much of it. His focus did not seem to be on the azure-robed cultivator. Luck? Hee hee. The man in the green robe took a sip of tea and laughed. "Brother Doe, did you notice? Do you know how many times that azure-robed cultivator has won? How many times?" The man in the red robe looked at the man in the green robe. "A total of 27 times. The man in the green robe smiled bitterly. If he didn't only bet 3 chips each time, I'm afraid he would have won a lot by now. Everyone's spirit stones here will soon be his." Oh, Brother Doe focused his gaze on the azure-robed cultivator. At this time, the azure-robed cultivator was standing next to a gambling table. That gambling table was the simplest form of shaking dice and betting on big or small. In fact, for a cultivator, they could choose any number of points on the die. However, the dice of the gold gathering inn were special and could not be controlled by the cultivator's spiritual power. At the same time, the people who shook the dice were all mortals. However, behind these mortals, there were extremely powerful cultivators overseeing. For example, the peak of a nascent soul realm on the second floor was only a second-rate character in this gold gathering inn. As long as it was not a soul transformation expert, they could deal with it. If a soul transformation expert came, there would naturally be people monitoring them. Therefore, although the people who came here to gamble were all cultivators, almost no one dared to cheat. First, there's no need, and second, they would be beaten to death. The gold gathering and also did not play tricks in the dark. Therefore, winning countless spirit stones here was really a matter of luck and calculation. More than anything, it was a kind of pleasure. Big, small, big. As long as there was a gambling place, there would be people shouting. Even if the entire gambling house was filled with cultivators, and half of them were nascent soul realm cultivators. However, the atmosphere was foul and not much different from that of mortals. This was the chaotic gods continent. Core formation cultivators were everywhere, and nascent soul realm cultivators were as numerous as dogs. The foundation establishment cultivators here were like skeletons of mortals. This was because almost everyone on the chaotic gods continent was a cultivator. At this time, the azure-robed cultivator casually threw 3 chips on the table. Each chip was worth 100 mid-grade spirit stones. At the nascent soul realm, that was not a large amount. What he bet was small. Open. The dealer saw that everyone had bet enough, and suddenly opened the cup. 1, 2, 3 small. The dealer called and began to collect the chips. The cultivators who bet lost more and won less. However, coincidentally, the azure-robed cultivator won again. Although he only had 3 chips, he had one close to 100 chips in his storage bag. Hee. The azure-robed cultivator laughed, seemingly a bit bored. This was because he had won 33 times in a row. The number given by the green robe manager on the second floor was actually not accurate. The azure robe cultivator had played all the games in the entire gambling house and won all of them. At this time, the azure robe cultivator no longer bet. Instead, he went straight to the counter and exchanged all his chips for mid-grade spirit stones. He had exchanged over 10,000 mid-grade spirit stones. He had made a small fortune. The cultivator in charge of the exchange was also a bit surprised. The 2 managers on the second floor couldn't help but look at each other. The azure-robed cultivator put away the spirit stones and smiled faintly. He thought to himself, second senior brother's inheritance is really not bad. He wins every bet, truly invincible. Chapter 236. The dream lasted for 1,000 years, and when she woke up, her past was like smoke. After leaving Wooming Town, Sumo crossed the sky ditch on the lotus throne. The lotus pistils were the boats, and the petals were the sails. The sky ditch was indeed very dangerous. There were black holes and whirlpools everywhere. Sumo even saw a few giant beasts lurking in the sky ditch. When the wild beasts came out to look for food, they also looked at Sumo's lotus throne. 2 of them were a 2-headed evil dragon and a 2-winged giant wolf. They seemed to want to touch the light of the lotus throne. However, the little white pig, who was in Sumo's arms, poked his head out lazily. Then, the little fellow grinned at the 2 evil beasts. The 2 ferocious beasts immediately turned around and ran. Oomph! The little white pig was very proud of himself. The dragon elephant soul-eating beast was a beast from the Pure Land. Who would dare to touch it? The little white pig was very excited as it looked at the gutter. If it weren't for Sumo, he would have flown 1 round in the sky ditch before coming back. At the same time, Sumo wondered why this guy didn't grow up. I slept for 1,000 years, but the little white pig is still the little white pig. Just like that, the journey was more daunting than dangerous. However, Sumo flew for half a month before he saw the chaotic gods continent. If it weren't for the map that Guanxiong gave him, Sumo would have thought that he was lost. In fact, the straight-line distance between the White Bones continent and the chaotic gods continent was only a few 100,000 miles. However, he had to avoid risks and take many detours, so it wasn't easy to get there. The Forgotten City was the first city that Sumo came to on the chaotic gods continent. He purposely suppressed his own cultivation. Originally, Sumo could have used 7 senior sisters' inheritance to change his face, but he didn't think it was necessary. because no one on the chaotic gods continent knew him except for Guanxiong. Sumo stayed in the Forgotten City for 2 days and took a look at the local customs. The cultivators on the chaotic gods continent were much more advanced than those on the White Bones continent. Core formation and nascent soul cultivators could be seen everywhere, and there were quite a few soul transformation cultivators in this small city. At the same time, it was more lively here. The Forgotten Capital City was neither big nor small, but there were many people here. Sumo had come to the god of chaos to explore. Of course, he also wanted to look for Guanxiong, but on the map that Guanxiong gave him, there was no indication of his position. Sumo only knew that Guanxiong was the descendant of the immortal illusionary realm, but she knew nothing about the power behind him. Where can I find Guanxiong? On second thought, Sumo's own dream of 1,000 years. If Guanxiong had waited for him to save him, he would have been long dead. However, Sumo could guarantee that Guanxiong would not die, nor would he really have his little bird cut. As a result, Sumo was relatively carefree when she first arrived on the Chaos Gods continent. Otherwise, he wouldn't be loitering around the gold gathering in casino. After exchanging the spirit stones, Sumo went straight to her bedroom on the 3rd floor. However, she ran into a green-robe cultivator on the 2nd floor. The green-robe cultivator was one of the managers of the casino. He smiled and cupped his fist at Sumo. "Greetings, fellow Taoist. I am Fu Wanqing, a small steward of this inn." "Oh." Sumo cupped his fists in return. "I am Sumo. Greetings, fellow Taoist Fu. May I know what advice you have for me?" Fu Wanqing smiled and said, "What advice do you have?" However, when I was on the 2nd floor, I saw that fellow Taoist Su had a winning streak. However, you only bet 3 chips each time. You are not arrogant, nor greedy. I'm very impressed. I wonder if you'd like to have a drink or two with me. Let's get to know each other. Hee. Sumo laughed. "Fellow Taoist, thank you for your hospitality. Sumo will gladly accept." In Sumo's eyes, a peak nascent soul cultivator was an ordinary cultivator. However, Sumo had just arrived on the Chaos Gods continent. He only had a map, so of course he couldn't. Getting to know a local cultivator would definitely be beneficial. That was why Sumo wouldn't refuse an invitation like this. Thus, Fu Wanqing led Sumo to a private room on the 2nd floor. A banquet had already been prepared. The red-robed senior marshal brother Do was already inside. Seeing that Fu Wanqing had invited Sumo, senior marshal brother Do stood up and cupped his fists. "I am Do Tianlu. Welcome, fellow Taoist." Sumo greets fellow Taoist Do. Sumo returned the greeting. The 3 of them took their seats. The dishes on the table were filled with the delicacies of the forgotten capital. Fu Wanqing poured wine for all 3 of them. "This is our first meeting. Let me toast first." Fu Wanqing drank his cup first. Sumo didn't act pretentious. She raised her cup and downed it. Do Tianlu followed suit and drank his cup. After drinking, the relationship between the 3 of them became a little closer. "Brother Su, which sect are you from?" Fu Wanqing asked as he invited Sumo to eat. He, a peak nascent soul cultivator, addressed Sumo as brother, giving Sumo plenty of face. "I am a wandering cultivator. I don't belong to any sect, nor do I have a fixed residence. However, I've only entered this place because of my travels," Sumo said. "Oh." Fu Wanqing and Do Tianlu nodded. On the chaotic gods continent, there were many wandering cultivators. Moreover, they didn't belong to any sect, and each had their own opportunities. It was because these wandering cultivators traveled the chaotic gods continent that the continent was also known as the nomadic continent. The meaning was that there were many wandering cultivators, and they were like nomads. Sumo's answer was spot on. "Brother Su, can you tell me how you managed to win every bet?" Fu Wanqing asked with a smile. At this time, Do Tianlu also looked at Sumo curiously. It wasn't a big deal that Sumo had won 10,000 spirit stones. More importantly, they wanted to know how Sumo managed to win so many times without losing. They had been in charge of the Gathering Gold Casino for several decades. Winning and losing was a normal thing. It was common for people to win a lot in the end. However, Sumo had won more than 30 times in a row using various methods. Oh, hearing Fu Wanqing's question, Sumo couldn't help but laugh. Excuse me, brothers. Actually, there's no secret. It's just that I can predict the outcome of every bet. Predict the outcome of a bet? Fu Wanqing and Do Tianlu were shocked. What kind of ability was that? Brother Su, you're saying that you can predict the outcome of every bet? Then you better choose, right? Fu Wanqing asked. Hee hee. Sumo laughed. You can say that. Originally, I didn't really trust my intuition, but after trying it today, I'm sure it's accurate. To tell you the truth, I won a total of 33 rounds in a row today, and they were all at different tables. I didn't mean to win the spirit stones. I just wanted to verify my guess. Sumo's words were not false at all. That was the ability of second senior brother. As long as it was a bet, second senior brother had never lost. That was because second senior brother had a natural ability to predict the outcome of a bet. Back then, sixth senior brother Liu Tianzhan had lost to second senior brother Du Shusheng countless times. When Sumo first entered the casino, he didn't feel anything special. However, later on, he discovered that he had a super long ability. For Sumo, that ability was just for fun at the moment and didn't have much practical meaning. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.